Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Orford, Acting Chair of NHS Devon Integrated Care Board. Welcome to the November 2024 meeting of the Board. This meeting is a meeting held in public and it's a meeting which we're streaming live to our YouTube channel. We've got some apologies today from Kate Shields, from Piers Tetley and from Phil Mante. And before we start the board meeting, I'd just like to welcome some people to their first board meeting today. We've got Martin Sykes, who has been appointed as an interim independent non-executive member of the board. We have Sam Higginson, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Royal Devon University Hospitals Foundation Trust. Sam is our partner member designate for NHS Trusts and Foundation Trusts, and Sam's going to take over this responsibility from Liz Davenport, the CEO of Torbay Hospitals Foundation Trust, who's retiring at the end of the year and who is also here today. And this will be your last meeting, Liz, so welcome to the meeting. We have Peter Collins, our newly appointed Chief Medical Officer, and welcome to the meeting, Peter. And on the appointment of Peter, I'd also just like to note our thanks to Alex Deegan, who has provided executive medical input to our board meetings over the past few months. So we'll record our thanks to Alex. We also welcome remotely, we welcome Terry Willows, who is the Company Secretary of Cornwall and Isles of Scilly ICB, who is deputising today for Kate Shields. We welcome Ginny Snaith, who's our Director of Population Health, and Ginny will be presenting our People and Communities item on the agenda. And we also welcome John Finn, our Deputy Chief Operating Officer. Online, we have Graham Clark, Donna Manson and Tandy Hara, and we welcome also Hisham Khalil, a board observer who joins us online as well. Also, we have Mark Cook from the Managing Director of NHS England South West Region, and joining remotely we have Alison Williams, the System Improvement Director for NHS England. And also, since the last meeting, we welcome Penny Smith as our newly appointed Chief Nursing Officer, and Piers Tetley, who has given apologies for the meeting today, who has also been substantially appointed as the Chief People Officer at the ICB. So we welcome also the members of the public viewing the meeting online and those in the room with us here in Exeter today. I'd like to remind everyone that this is a meeting in public and not a public meeting. We have received some questions from Councillor Jan Goffey, who's with us here today, and we'll be responding to those questions in writing to Jan, and we'll be putting those responses onto our website after the meeting. But we can take other questions from members of the public towards the end of the meeting if there are any. Just to remind everyone, there is a board meeting in private session which follows the meeting in public, and at that meeting we'll be discussing items commercial in confidence relating to primary care provision, and together with a draft of our response to the 10-year health plan. So before we start, Philippa, can I just check that the meeting is quorate?
Yes, I can confirm.
Thanks, Philippa. So let's move to the declarations of interest. These are listed at 1.2 on the agenda and in the pack. There's a couple of omissions which of people who are new to the board. So Philippa, can I just ask you to give us a bit of background to that, please?
Yes, specifically in relation to Martin Sykes, our new interim INEM, he is also an independent non-executive member of the NHS Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Integrated Care Board. Terry Willows as Company Secretary and I have discussed this, and we don't anticipate any conflicts of interest as a result of these two appointments, but we will be taking care to ensure that we review the papers that are provided to any meeting that Martin attends to identify any potential conflicts of interest, and we will flag those to the most relevant chair. Thanks. Should they occur, which is unlikely.
Thanks, Philippa. And Terry, we don't have an entry for you on the register of interest. Is there anything you want to declare to the meeting related to items on the agenda today?
No, I can confirm I've got no conflicts in relation to the agenda.
Thanks, Terry. OK, we'll note the register of interests in that case, and let's move to the minutes of the meeting of the 18th of September 2024. I'm not going to go through them page by page, but can I just ask board members if there are any points of accuracy which anyone would like to highlight to the meeting today? So if not, then the board approves the minutes of the meeting of the 18th of September 2024. If we move on to the action register coming out of that meeting, we're asked to agree the closure of actions 37C, 58.1, 59.1 and 3, 62, 63 and 64.2. Is everybody happy to agree the closure of those actions? Okay, let's agree the closure of those actions. We then have updates in respect of actions 68, 69, 71 and 9, 37B, 38, 39, 55, 59, 3 and 60. Is everybody content with the explanations of the status of those actions? Is there anything anyone wants to flag up relating to them? I have just got one question, which was around 24037B, which is down to Bill and Penny. So we don't have a kind of new closure date for that. And this one relates to a review of the impact of a patient's right to choose upon costs, waiting lists and the private sector's involvement in the area of children and young people's services to be undertaken. Penny?
Thank you, Chair. So this was subject to conversation 2 months ago, including Donna Manson and also the 3 DCSs. So the element around right to choose, we're controlling costs because the referrals are via GP into valid NHS providers. So the recommendations arising, we will be working with our DCSs to achieve those, and obviously it links to the education, health and care plans. The ones that we need to continue to work with the DCSs, and the DCSs are currently undertaking a piece of work. So when I say DCS, I mean Directors of Children's Services. Those families and children who are being assessed privately without any reference to health prior, so it's direct referral. But then obviously that means those recommendations can have impact on people's education, health and care plans, imposing potential cost to both local authority and health. And of course we wouldn't want to avoid that cost. It's important, however, that there's a process of validation. So we're currently waiting for the DCSs to come back with those numbers, and then we're working together to look at how we can validate.
Thanks, Penny. That's a really helpful update. So we'll update. We'll put the update into the minutes, and let's note the progress on the outstanding actions there. Okay. So if we now move on to the agenda item. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Donna, I didn't see that. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just think we should have a further note that this matter is not resolved at this moment in time, because it would not be affordable for local government. But we are working together and trying to find a resolution. But I think it's important to put that marker down. And also to complement the fact that, you know, colleagues have been getting in the room looking to find a way forward with it, but it's important to note it would not be affordable. Okay,
thanks for that, Donna. That's helpful. So let's make a note of that for the minutes as well. Thank you. So let's move on to our agenda item for our people and communities' experiences of health and social care. And we have Ginny Snaith is with us, as I said, and Ginny will introduce a short film which focuses on the impact of the Devon GP Fellowship Health Inequalities Programme. Over to you, Ginny.
Thank you, Chair. It's great that this particular initiative is being presented to the board today, partly because I think it's a really good way of demonstrating very innovative work in terms of approaches to health inequalities, but it's also great because part of the programme and part of the work of the GPs that are involved in it is about telling stories and amplifying patient voices, and being able to be streamed live on YouTube is a really great way of doing that. So being able to present this work today is really appreciated. So the programme is coming to the end of the 3rd cohort, so we've been running it for 3 years, and we are just going through the process of procurement to run the programme, extend it for next year. And essentially what it is about having offering GPs, and this year we're extending it out to other members of the primary care team, including AHPs, giving them a day a week to look at a particular area of health inequalities, something that they have interest in or have concerns about and want to explore and look at ways of doing things differently. And that essentially is the brief. So there is opportunity for them to follow where the leads go, to talk to communities, to develop relationships, to look at the networks and to do what needs to be done. And it's coming out with some fascinating and really beneficial changes in the way that we work, both for patients, but also for the GPs and the professionals that are involved in it, and I'll let them speak for themselves about the differences it's making for them. If I may, I'd just like to give you a few questions to think about as you listen to this. One of them is about how we commission in these very, very complex areas. So we need to recognise that taking standardised approaches to addressing health inequalities isn't always particularly helpful and can actually be detrimental. So actually it can exacerbate health inequalities if we don't look at commissioning flexibly. So how do we commission for this sort of thing where it's very difficult to say, we're going to do this, it's going to result in that, and it's going to give you that change in that metric at the end of it? How do we build that into our processes? How do we commission for learning and development? So actually looking at the real, as I say, one of the real benefits of this work is that we have GPs who were at the point of walking away from primary care and saying, it's not for me, I don't want to do this any longer. And we now have three of the GPs from this year's cohort saying, we're going to stay in primary care. Two of them moving to deep end practices, so the most kind of disadvantaged practice where it's most difficult to recruit. So actually that benefit for the system can't be underestimated. So how do we actually commission for that learning and development when that's a really difficult thing to measure and put metrics on? And then the third element, which came out really, really strongly from all the people that have participated in this, is around involvement with VCSC, voluntary sector, and with communities. How do we support that work? How do we kind of promote those relationships with the VCSC? And how, again, do we kind of look at working with a much more complicated system rather than commissioning from a single organisation to do a single thing? I'll let them speak for themselves because I think this is really exciting and really interesting, and it'd be great to get your feedback on how it's gone so far. Thank you.
The GP Fellowship Programme is a programme that's funded for one session a week over a year. It helps GPs who work in deprived areas to devise a project to reduce health inequalities.
So we've got some real inner city deprivation, we've got coastal communities, we've got rural deprivation, and we've got some diverse inclusion groups. And having one model that can always meet and fit all of those different needs is just, it feels unrealistic. And yet we've got standardised funding models and approaches that are trying to meet the needs of everyone, which doesn't seem possible. And we're not always allocating resources and time and need to those that most need it.
It started off as a project looking to improve cervical screening figures within the surgery and the community in our area of Exeter. And it's morphed in several ways, including connections with the school, connections with the community centre, and various projects that have been devised along the way to improve community togetherness.
The first quality improvement project I did was around smoking and trying to improve the uptake of the smoking cessation services. 40% of our patients were smokers, which is extremely high compared to the national average. So for my second fellowship, I extended that project and I looked at early detection of lung cancer.
Unlike other programmes around the country, this fellowship looks at, we let people in at any stage of their career. So people will have quite different needs. Some may be newly qualified and really need to pick up some skills to work in the area that they work in.
It's allowed me time to extend the reach of the surgery into the community and to integrate more and break down barriers with people outside an appointment. I had a patient who came in with quite depressed. His wife had died. He was feeling quite isolated. And rather than talking about medication, we started to talk about what his hobbies were. And I was able to say, with the knowledge that I have now, that, you know, there was a men's walking football group and maybe he should join, and I could give him the contact details, tell him when it was on and where to go. And he joined and went and came back to me 6 months later and said, it's amazing, I've got so many friends there, this is just what I needed. That kind of thing that I can offer instead of medication is much, much better in terms of the health of the patient.
We've got a wide geographical spread, which is great. So we've seen projects done rurally, on the coast and in inner city. We've had people focus on refugee and asylum seekers, and another member of the cohort developed a fisherman clinic in Brixham Harbour, bringing in local community organisations, voluntary sector and public health. We've got some working in trauma-informed care that are now developing trauma-informed training models for all of primary care that's starting to be rolled out. We've had fellows that have moved into menopause advisory roles for the ICB, so there's a lot about personal development, and we're kind of developing experts in their fields that are giving back to the system and developing future leaders.
I've been able to be a connecting person between the community centre, which is almost next door to the surgery, and the local school up the road, and the church, which runs a lot of community events. It's broken down a lot of access barriers, I think, for patients. And more widely, I think it's really important that that healthcare is much more holistic.
I can absolutely say, hands down, that the fellowship has totally transformed my working life as a GP, because it gave me the opportunity to have time and space to be creative, to explore what motivated me, what interested me. I have felt that I was able to develop new skills, build on existing knowledge. I'm now in a position where I've moved from working as a long-term locum GP into a salaried role in a practice in Plymouth. I've rediscovered my enthusiasm and my passion for general practice.
It's fantastic the fellowship is getting more visibility. We're going into another round of recruitment, and we are hopefully getting some allied healthcare professionals. But I think, you know, the growing vision should be that people in multi-professional roles should have this capacity in their working week to think creatively about the needs of their community and to put some of their personal passion and energy into that. Because we are an integrated care system now, and that includes many different bodies, nursing groups, and, you know, maybe even think beyond this, thinking to social care and education, to think about how we can really sort of draw attention to this in the widest possible context.
So thanks for that really, really inspiring video there. I'm going to just ask Frank O'Kelly to make some observations on that, and I'll open it up to the rest of the meeting. Over to you, Frank.
Thank you. I am incredibly proud to be a GP in Devon when that's the calibre of the GPs that are coming through the system. Daniel, who leads it, basically it's through education, and it's one session a week. And what we're doing is we're giving people the time and headspace to think. I went to their sort of roundup day and listened to all of the presentations, and they were just all as equally good as that. There were others on sort of menopause that have developed into a CIC. There's one at Bell's Place in North Devon, which is basically a cafe looking after people who are street homeless and actually have referrals in from the NHS. As a result of this sort of seed funding, things happen. The GPs in North Devon now are running a clinic out of that space, and they are now going to fund it going forward to the tune of about £4,000 a year. A lot of this will never become apparent to us unless we start to think and commission differently. They are the leaders of tomorrow, as far as I'm concerned. They are getting out of the four walls of their environment, and they are getting into the communities. And that is where we all need to move. We have had a very medical model of care, and the social model of care is where we need to go, because we don't have the estates, we don't have the people, and we don't have the money. So we have to use the resources in those communities, and that's what these people are doing. And the most important part of it was the three doctors who said not only were they going to move away from general practice, they were going to move away from medicine. So I think giving professionals the time and space to think across the whole of NHS Devon is quite important. But I'm really, really proud of them.
Thanks, Frank, and I have to thank you for inviting me to that day of the presentations, because it was one of the most inspiring days that I've had while I've been in Devon, actually. So it really was a brilliant day. Judy.
Thank you very much, and I agree they were very inspiring and it's very encouraging. I just wanted to broaden out slightly. We have a lot of staff who are across our system who are absolutely committed to the NHS but tired, and we must look in our workforce strategy at ways in which everybody gets the chance to have some, may I use the word re-inspiration? I don't know that it's a real word, but I think we should be making sure that in our workforce work we do that. There are lots of other schemes where people can take some paid time. I was at the PENARC conference, the Applied Research Collaborative, last week. They have lots of opportunities for people to do small bits of work alongside continuing in their job. So it's not as though we lose people when we do this. It's almost an invest to save. It increases productivity. It's something we should feed into all of our thinking about workforce.
Thanks, Judy. And Lincoln.
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to say that we've worked with at least 2 of these fellows. It's a great opportunity to build links with public health and primary care, because we were traditionally much more married together before. And some of the really great work in terms of cardiovascular disease prevention and getting out and working in Paynton with the hub and with the VCS, for example, some really brilliant work. We've done outreach with the GP, who's continued to have a connection with us. We've done stuff at Torquay United matches, for example, doing blood pressure checks, reaching people where they are. He came to one of our overview and scrutiny. We did blood pressure checks for members, which again, the power, because sometimes they don't listen to us who work for them, but, many voices. So really positive. And just to echo what Judy said, there are other schemes that we sometimes host for different professionals and very much open. My colleagues as well in Devon County and Plymouth, very happy to continue to support this kind of thing.
Thanks, Lincoln. Let's move to Tandy.
Yeah, just to register my own impression as well of this. This is really, I think, where we need to be heading, particularly as we move more towards prevention. What I really like about this is that there's so many points that are positive. I mean, she mentioned community centres, links to church, mental health, walking. And I think that we've been, for a long time talking about, moving a little bit more towards prevention. I think what we need to do is just to see what are the areas we can use this model, in particular leveraging the system, the community space and the voluntary space. I think for me, this is a way to go in terms of going more towards prevention.
Thanks, Tandy. I mean, there's some themes running through that around how we take this forward and work with it into the future. So, Steve, do you want to come in with some observations on that?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much in that vein, really. I mean, it is. I don't know about you, feel quite re-inspired just watching the video. That actually we can see that relatively small initiatives can have a huge benefit and ticks a whole load of boxes, both for us and for our local population and our staff. I think the question for us as an ICB is how do we, I'm trying to struggle with a different word, I don't want to call it industrialise, but how do we do this at significant scale? I think it's a practice one, I think. How we do this at scale. I think as we start to think into the new year as an ICB about what our strategy ought to look like, at its heart it needs to be one which I think, as Frank has described, as it's based on a social model for health. We know, Jenny, I know you sort of had that challenge, that question for us about sometimes it's difficult to draw a straight line between doing something and the impact it has. But there are lots of places in the world that have done many of these things that actually we can learn some of that impact from. I was particularly taken by the social connections story that was on the video. We know in places like Bilbao and Barcelona, they've done some of this, and it has created significant reductions in the need for any kind of statutory support for people. And we know that our population is getting older, more isolated. So there is just something for me as we start to now think about what our comprehensive strategy is, that we absolutely ensure that at the core of it, it is about population health and prevention, and it's based on a recognition of a need for a social model as opposed to what we've had in the past, which has been largely biomedical. But really, really good to see. So I think the challenge there is how do we really scale this?
Okay, I've got a couple of other points. I've got Martin, and then I've got Peter, and then we'll wrap this item up. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, I suppose just following on from that and thinking about the questions posed, I suppose part of the industrialisation is keeping the sort of micro scale and local sort of benefit, because it's clear that some of these things are very bottom up and unique to individual areas. So it's how do we keep that variability? The first two questions are about, I suppose, commissioning, and this is somewhat different to what we've done in the past. I suppose one of the key things there is to be able to take a punt on things without having the traditional business case, and this is going to be the direct result, because you can't always see that. So we do need to be in a sort of different commissioning space to be able to do that. And I think the third question was about the VCSE and how do we support, and I'm not a member of the VCSE, but as I understand it, part of the problem is year-to-year contracts and not being able to keep people on, or having to sort of potentially lose staff towards the end of a financial year. So I would say, the more we can do things multi-year rather than piece by piece is probably another additional benefit, perhaps.
Thanks, Martin. Really helpful. And final point to Peter, please.
Thank you. And I won't take any credit for any of this. And Ginny continually holds up the mirror to me to make me understand the importance of changing the focus. For me, I think there is that thing about how do we move into commissioning an environment rather than commissioning for a particular thing or outcome, which I think this is starts to describe in a better way. But I think equally it's really important for us to be able to align to the priorities for the population of Devon. So rather than just have a complete grey, we have to make sure that we are trying to create an environment that aligns to what our population need, various parts of our population. And finally, I think that what will help in that space, which often feels quite woolly, and as I'm learning more about the commissioning world, the understanding of how you describe value back. I think we have to work on different models of being able to measure social value and impact that will help us be much more confident about some of the punts that Martin was describing, I think.
Thanks, Peter. Ginny, is there any final points of view that you want to just leave us with?
No, I think it's been fascinating to hear the debate and feel very supported in taking this work forward. I think one of the things I would say that when Deborah, that you saw talking there, sort of started presenting her work at the event we described, she started off by saying, this was a failure because I didn't do what I set out to do at the beginning. So that the thing that was set out at the beginning was to increase cervical screening rates. I don't know if she's done that or not, probably won't know for a little while, but she draws a diagram of a tree that goes off in all different directions. So actually, just having that approach where we can let those things happen and have some space to do that, I think is really, really important.
Thanks, Ginny. So, and thanks, Ginny and Frank, for all the work that you've put into this. It's really brilliant work. And I'd just like to thank the three GPs who were in the video, Deborah Morgan, Daniel Corn and Helen Price, for their time in that, but also to the rest of the fellowship. And thanks to Kerry and the comms team for pulling the video together, because it's really, really great. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to to my chair's report. Now, I'm going to take most of the report as read, but there are two issues that I want to highlight to the board for discussion and agreement. So the first one is that my report recommends some proposed amendments to the membership of the board assurance committees. And there's a further amendment to the proposed committee membership, which we've agreed since this report was written, and that is that we're now proposing that Frank O'Kelly should also join the membership of the People and Organisational Development Committee. So with that proposed amendment, are there any points which board members would wish to raise relating to committee membership in terms of reference? There's a point, I don't know if Graham Clark is still with us, but there's a point that Graham asked me to raise if he wasn't in the meeting at this point, which was that he's noted the significant workload that's falling on the non-executive members, and particularly those who are chairing two committees. So he's just asked me to clarify that the arrangements that we're setting out in the paper today are pending the appointment of new independent non-executive members, which we hope will be in place by February. So we'll look again at the membership and look again at the workload across individual board members at that point. But is the board then happy to agree the proposed amendments to the terms of reference of the board assurance committees and the membership of those committees? Okay, thank you. The second issue I just want to go into in some detail is that I want to highlight to the board the receipt of a petition signed by 2,550 people at the time of writing the report. And the petition relates to the decision of the Integrated Care Board to not recommission a service by the Stroke Association for non-clinical services in the county. So I'm going to read out what the petition says. It says the Stroke Association's Devon Stroke Recovery Service is being forced to close because NHS Devon and Plymouth City Council have said they will no longer fund it. The service has given incredible support to thousands of stroke survivors in our county, and the decision to axe funding will be disastrous for the many thousands of people who will be unfortunate enough to have a stroke in coming years. So last week I met with the Stroke Association Regional Director and a number of stroke survivors and their carers, and I received the petition from them. And also is privileged to hear firsthand from them about their experiences of the services, which they see as having been hugely valuable to them. So I was joined in that meeting by John Finn, the Deputy Director of Deputy Chief Operating Officer, and by Nicola Bonus, the Deputy Director of Communication and Engagement. So during the meeting, we explained that investment in stroke services is a priority for the Integrated Care Board, and indeed spend on those services has increased during this financial year. And we also explained the context of the financial challenges faced by the NHS in Devon, and in particular the need to reduce spend in some areas in order that we can reinvest in other areas. And we explained the decommissioning of this contract is part of an overall £200 million cost improvement programme across Devon in this financial year. So we agreed that we would bring the petition to this board meeting today for discussion. Since the meeting, I've received a communication from the Stroke Association Director for the South West, in which she recognises the exceptional financial circumstances that we find ourselves in, but she asks for further discussions with us around an exploration of alternative methods of funding for the Life After Stroke pathway. So with that further background to the petition, I'd just like to open up this issue for discussion at the board. And John, I don't know if at the start of this is anything you'd just like to add to my summary of where we've got to so far with this.
Yeah. I just think it's important to reiterate the fact that this is part of a programme of work. So under Anthony's leadership as the executive, actually we have a programme of work under contract review, which significantly contributes to our £80 million deficit. So I'd just like that to be understood in that context.
Thank you, John. Judy.
Thank you very much. I think we should be pleased that we have voluntary organisations in this part of the world that are both very active and vocal, and how we work with them is important. So my point was really, what learning do we take from this situation? And I think that when you're under financial pressure, you often look at small bits of a care pathway, and I know we were doing a review of small contracts, and this was included in that. So for me, it's how do we make sure that when we make decisions about individual contracts, we do it in the context of the service overall, and in a way that consults with people. And the new commissioning group that the executives are setting up, and I believe Peter is going to chair, will have an opportunity to make sure that we look at things in the round when we make decisions on small areas like this.
Thanks, Judy. John, do you want to respond to that?
I certainly will. So firstly, just need to recognise that there has been a lot of learning. I detailed previously, actually, this was part of a programme of work around a contract review. This was the first piece of work. This was the first contract that we did look at. We have, no, I think in your chair's report, as you talk about the biggest bits of learning, and certainly in terms of ensuring that a 6 month notice period prior to this is absolutely critical. We also need a clear plan for stakeholder engagement. And I say engagement because we don't have to consult on non-clinical contracts, but we should be engaging further as a key part of the learning. But we've already taken some of that learning into our work and as part of this programme. So through the Devon Investment Group, chaired by Bill, on a monthly basis, every contract with a year's view that's coming into notice is discussed. There's a communication to the executive director that is the case, and there's a 6 month period by which that executive director can decide whether or not they want to continue to commission it or not. That gives us the time we need to engage with our stakeholders. That's not going to happen. That is happening. And I said the contract team, which following the reorganisation now sits under Anthony's executive leadership, delivered through myself. We're now commissioning and contracting in the one team. That makes that an almost seamless process, basically. But I'd really to assure the board there's been some really important learning taking place in this, actually, and we're in a much better place both to understand contracts that are coming up for review. We have processes to review those. We have commissioning processes working with contracting to support that. So, some of the other bits of learning around, and again, this is an honest conversation in terms of the contracting team's use of EQIAs, and that's something that we're used to doing. There was a concise EQA use in this process, basically, from this point onwards, and actually before this, basically, the full EQA process will be part of any contract review.
Thanks, John. On the EQI point, I just wanted to bring in Penny, actually, just to talk about some of the work that we're doing around improving our processes around that.
Thank you, Chair. And it's been subject to conversation at prior board. So we're currently rolling out training for every member of the ICB. I personally led some training yesterday for 30 members of staff, working with Anthony to make sure it's absolutely part of the commissioning cycle, because that really talks to Judy's point around how do we see things in the round, both along a pathway but also for groups of the population. We're also doing some work to make sure that we record the EQIAs and code them so that we can run trend analysis on them, and then working really closely with Ginny around not only inequality but also linking it to the broader population health. I think there is certainly learning to also look at the EQIA process should also look at potential benefit as well as the disbenefit, and we really should be informing every single decision we do in the organisation. And it shouldn't be just confined to a form, it's about a mindset, and that's the basis of the training.
Thanks, Penny, and thanks for the personal drive that you've put behind that. Is going to make a real difference, I think. Frank.
Thank you, Chair. I think this builds very nicely on actually our first film and what everything has said so far. We're very good at working out the cost of things. Trying to work out the value of something is much more difficult, and that's what the sort of space we need to move into. And I think in order to work out the value of, and I completely understand why the decision was made in terms of this isn't a clinical service, but in order to understand the value, I'd just like you to put yourselves in their shoes for 2 minutes. You've had a stroke a month ago. You're paralysed down the left side. You'd had excellent support in hospital. You're now in an ambulance. You're taken home. You're carried up the stairs. You're put into your house. Your partner is terrified. You're terrified. Your children are adapting to something new. You've got a loo that your wheelchair can't get into, and you're sitting there and thinking, this is very different to being in the hospital where I had all that support. What do I do now? Who does that person go to? They end up calling lots of people around the system who cannot deliver the care because it's not coordinated, they don't know what they're doing. Having the VCSE grow this sort of support in the community is really important. So I think the challenge for us now is to go to whole system commissioning from a patient perspective. The pathway does not end when they get out of the hospital. The pathway is whatever the journey the patient is on. And so, I mean, call it pathway commissioning, whole system commissioning, intelligent commissioning, whatever we want, but we need to think across the whole provision rather than just in silos about secondary care commissioning, primary care commissioning, community care commissioning. That would be my suggestion.
Thanks, Frank. That's really helpful. And the this theme of whole pathway commissioning is one that which we need to take forward coming out of this thing. But I'll just ask John if you want to respond directly to Frank's points.
Yeah, and Frank, of course, I'll reflect on what you said. Actually, I do think it's also important to recognise actually that there's certain, in terms of the signposting and support to access services role that the Stroke Association service was undertaking, the services are still in place. So the services that the Stroke Association would signpost to are still there, and we need to make certain basically that the access to those services continues. And there's a number of processes that we've done and some that we are doing. So in terms of ensuring basically that stroke services, stroke rehab services understand where those services are, we need to enhance that and will enhance that in terms of the leaflet and signposting that is in place. We'll also put all that information on our own Devon ICB My Health website, and again signposting that is really, really important actually. In terms of all acute and rehab services basically prior to the ceasing of this contract actually will have that level of communication given to them. So there is still a process for the signposting into those services, not for one moment not recognising the feedback we had from stroke survivors and how they valued the Stroke Association process in undertaking that.
Thanks, John. Peter.
Just as I've sort of been put in the frame really for having to think about this in the longer term, I think it's really important for me that pathway commissioning, value-based commissioning also requires an element of understanding where is the least value. So if we are quite rightly putting our population in the space of describing what is of most value to them, we have to also harness their understanding of what is the least value to them, because there is only a cost envelope that we need to sit within for affordability. So I think it feels really important to just not forget to state that bit, that value sometimes can be used as a rationale to always add, but it also must be a rationale to take away as well.
Thanks, Peter. So can I suggest the following way forward on this? I mean, first, that we should note the receipt of the petition, which relates to the decision of the ICB not to recommission a service by the Stroke Association for non-clinical services in the county. And secondly, can we agree then to engage further with the Stroke Association in response to the communication from the Stroke Association Director for the South West, in which she requests discussions with NHS Devon on exploration of alternative methods of funding for the life after stroke pathway. And John, can I ask you to take that forward in the first instance, but then that the board should be appraised of the outcome of those discussions, perhaps through a future chair's report from me or from the chief exec in his report. Are we happy to proceed in that way? Thank you. Then can I just ask, are there any other questions or points relating to the rest of my chair's report this meeting? So if not, let's note the chair's report to the board, and we can move on to the chief executive's report. Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll similarly take my report broadly as read, but there were a few things that I wanted to highlight, some of which have already been mentioned by the Chair. But just to formally congratulate our latest appointments around the executive team. So Penny starting as our substantive Chief Nursing Officer, and in his absence today, Piers starting as our CPO, and of course this being Peter's first meeting. So I just wanted to extend my welcome to Piers. I also wanted to acknowledge and sort of record my thanks on behalf of the board for the work that Bill's doing in support of TSD with Liz's retirement. You would have seen the note that came out, an informal arrangement, but one which I think really important to help support the transition. In the normal way, Bill's deputy will be able to act into the gaps that may be left that Bill can't cover in those 3 days, as a deputy would for periods of leave and so on. I think what's important about this, and of course we have also agreed Sam Wadham-Sharp's support going in to also help, is that this demonstrates, I think, in the clearest possible way, the system wanting to work together in order to support each other, because we all succeed together. So very grateful for that. And then finally, just to mention, as Sam's already alluded to, that Sam has agreed to step up into the winter director role. And again, I sent a note out about how that's going to work. And we are very much, I feel, in the depths of winter already, given the challenges we're seeing across the system. So I'm very grateful to Sam for that. The other things I just wanted to highlight, the 10-year plan is in my report. I think a really important moment for the NHS. There is something quite important about keeping our heads up and starting to plan for the future in the long term. It feels to me, for all sorts of reasons, not least the pandemic, our planning horizons have been very shortened over the last few years. So this feels like an important moment for the whole NHS to look ahead and think about what it's trying to do over the next 10 years. And of course, I would emphasise, whilst it's called a 10-year plan, that isn't a plan to do something in 10 years. It's a plan to do things now, which will make the future better over that course. There are a number of events planned. I have encouraged all of our staff to be involved in those, and our communications team is supporting the whole NHS England efforts in relation to this. It's quite a short timescale. I think I would take confidence from the fact that probably we all know what the strategic issues are, and so does the public who feel every day the challenges that the NHS is facing. So whilst it's a short timescale, I'm hoping the richness of the feedback coming in will enable the NHS to put together a really strong plan, and something which is ambitious, and to pick up a point earlier, gives a sense of hope and re-inspiration, which is going to be my dictionary word of the day today, because I think that's also important for everybody who's working in the system. Also, just wanted to record my thanks to Health Watch and the VCSE community for supporting us in doing all of that. A couple of other things in my paper. You'll see there's an update on audiology service re-procurement. This was part of a review earlier in the year, and the board may remember there was an update in May. I think, as the paper says, the pilot, this was a different way of trying to provide audiology service, has probably not, in all fairness, reached the aims that we thought it would, and the models we've used in other parts of Devon have proved more successful. The re-procurement's proved a little complicated, and we've provided an update in the report, which I think Anthony can talk to if need to. We have had to delay this specialist re-procurement for the issues raised, but are making progress on the routine stuff. There are other things in my paper of the renewal of the Resound Strategic Partnership Agreement. Really good to see an update that I asked to come to board around GP collective action. Keen to ensure that we are as aware as we can be about what is quite a complex and difficult to track issue, but hopefully get a sense of where we are with that. As well as, in addition to all of that, our freedom to speak up arrangements and an update from the work of the executive team since the last time we met. But I'm happy to take any questions on any of that.
Any questions for Steve? Please.
It's not a question, but just an opportunity on behalf of my board to thank Steve and the NHS Devon team for providing support in my transition out. But importantly, we have to acknowledge the context, which is a challenging performance context. I just wanted to note that for the minutes, please.
Thanks, Liz. I just wanted to ask Steve, because Piers isn't in the meeting today, but I guess just an update on the reorganisation of the ICB, because we're coming to the end of that now. I wondered if it would just be useful to do that.
Yeah, we could probably find an opportunity to update the board more specifically on where we are with the actual numbers. But as of yesterday, I had a very brief informal update that we were getting near the end of it now. There were a number of people still in the at-risk pool, but that number was diminishing really quickly. So I think we're making good progress. Probably be helpful to take an update through the relevant committee, given that we are now hopefully in the later stages of it.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. And Sam.
I just wanted to make the link between, Steve, what you were saying about the 10-year plan consultation and Peter's point, because I think it's really important we have a wide conversation in Devon about what our population and patients want in the future, and inevitably that will mean some difficult decisions about services that we want to move or re-provide in a different way. And this is our opportunity to have that open conversation, isn't it? So it's really important for me.
Thanks, Sam. Penny.
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to the 10-year plan, so I feel it really important for the board to note that the perspective of children and young people really need to feature widely. Hannah Pugliese has done a really good response. That hasn't yet been included, but I do want the board to note that that work has been undertaken.
Yeah, thanks, Penny, for that. Any other questions for Steve? If not, let's note the Chief Executive's report, and we then move into the section of the agenda which focuses on the National Oversight Framework, and I'm going to ask Sam to take us into that report. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our progress report on our requirements to exit segment 4 of the National Oversight Framework with a view to exiting in the agreed timelines of Q1 of 25-26, which was amended from our original exit date, which would have been the same time this year. As always, this paper should be read in conjunction with the highlight report, which feeds our regional system improvement oversight process. It includes updates on the September performance data and progress reporting for all areas of NOF4 exit, bar elective, which is the August data based on the normal reporting timelines that we have with national data reporting. The highlight report now includes a confidence forecast for our ability to exit within Q1 of 25-26, as well as the current RAG rating status for where we are currently in the year. It should be noted that with this report we've already written the report for the next month, which is currently working its way through our governance processes, with a view that it will go to the regional SIAG on the 4th of December. So I can provide an overview of any of the updates that have happened subsequently to this paper if required, because we will be recommending a couple of changes to the RAG rating status within that paper, but that is still awaiting Chief Executive sign-off, so I'm happy to give a verbal update if required. So moving into the report against the 5 key exit criteria. So leadership remains satisfactory assurance and an amber RAG rating status based on the fact that we are up to date with all of the actions and the implementation of the leadership criteria, but we know that it will take time to embed, and we need to see how that impacts on the running of the system and moving towards NOF4 exit. Strategy has returned to satisfactory assurance and amber in this month, following the ability to now progress with some of the work that was delayed within the strategy section. So that is a positive move. Our UEC performance remains both limited in assurance and red RAG rating status in month, as does elective. And finance remains satisfactory assurance but red RAG rating status, and there is detail now added to the paper to cover why there is that discrepancy within the 2 different reports, and can be read as such. So just moving through the 3 key sort of performance areas in terms of UEC, elective and finance. So for September, all providers missed their original 4-hour trajectory and ambulance time lost trajectories in that month. Torbay were the largest outlier for 4-hour performance in September, with a dip in performance of around 5%, down to 65.43% in month, which left them 11% off trajectory. There has been a small recovery at Torbay within the month of October of around 3% in that month, so that should be noted. From where they were in September. The provider closest to meeting their trajectory remains University Hospitals Plymouth, although there is a risk to their original trajectory based on potential delays to the opening of the urgent treatment centre, and the associated 6% performance uplift expected with the opening of that. facility in December. There has been an opportunity to review trajectories from the national team, and University Hospitals Plymouth have taken the opportunity to review their trajectory based on some of those risks, and they will be reflected in the December paper, but we've also sought assurances on the actions that they're undertaking to mitigate any delays, and that has been undertaken through our locality performance reviews. RDUH remain the best performing provider within the system currently for 4-hour performance, but do remain off trajectory. And whilst we have plans in place for UHP and RDUH, which provides us with a level of confidence and the improved performance that we did see on both sites within that particular month, we are still seeking further confidence from Torbay and the support packages going in as detailed earlier. In terms of ambulance handover, so it remains an incredibly challenged position and did so within September. And I think we should note that it would also be one of the main areas of focus for NHSE through the winter, with zero tolerance on both 6-hour and 8-hour ambulance handover delays and a new reporting and gold structure in place. So all providers missed that trajectory in the month of September. UHP met their percentages of ambulances handed over within 15 minutes, but it should be noted that they had the lowest expected performance within the system and still had significant delays within ambulance handover performance. In terms of elective, so for August, all providers missed their original trajectory for 78-week waits and 65-week waits. We continue to exceed the cancer trajectories for 28-day and 62-day performance, and we also exceed the national standard for 28-day performance at the moment, so that is a positive position within cancer. There will be a new trajectory that has been reworked by each of our providers, included within the November paper, and with everybody focusing on the aim of clearing all 78-week waiters by the end of December and all 65-week waiters by the end of March. We're seeing positive tracking against those new trajectories within October, and it should be noted that we've also de-escalated from Tier 1 oversight within elective, which is an incredibly positive move for us, based on, I think, our maintained clearance rates, which remain some of the best in the country, and also our productivity rates within the system, which can at times exceed the national standard by 4 times where we are there. In terms of finance, I won't go into too much detail here because it will be covered later on the agenda, but in month 6, we had a 15.9 million deficit versus the plan of 15.2 million, meaning that cumulatively we were adverse by 0.7 million, quite heavily linked to the costs unfunded of industrial action, but we forecast continuing to meet the plan. There were 66 million in efficiencies achieved to month 6, which was 5.7 million above the plan, and we are still aiming for the 213.3 million efficiencies within the year. 71% of efficiency schemes are now fully developed, which has improved from 57% within month 5, and the number of high-risk schemes has reduced from 18% to 10%. The 88 million of risk that was identified at planning stage is now down to 35 million net risk, which has improved by 6.1 million in month 5, but the finance paper will take us through in greater detail. I'm happy to stop there and take any questions.
Thanks, Sam. It's worth pointing out also that we had a long discussion on the Finance and Performance Committee a couple of weeks ago, and we did some deep diving into some of the mitigations to the risks which Sam has been highlighting to us. But any questions for Sam? Mark.
Not a question, just a comment, Chair, if I can, on behalf of NHS. And first of all, to recognise all the hard work that the system has been doing. It's incredibly challenging circumstances, and as Sam said, notable progress in lots of areas, including elective, and well done as a system for coming out of Tier 1 into Tier 2 for elective. So really good progress on lots of areas. And that's noted, but also significant risk still. And we know that particularly urgent care is still quite fragile. We've seen that this week in the wake of Storm Bert, which understandably, difficulty with people getting to work and people wanting to access services and so on. So that's demonstrated that there's still significant challenges to overcome. But I know that everybody's working incredibly hard to do that. Just a note of for board awareness, we don't know yet. The detail hasn't been announced, although it's been announced in terms of high-level numbers, but we don't know the detail yet in terms of next year's financial settlement. So things like how much will be available for programme funding, how much will be available for other initiatives and so on, and what the impact of that is likely to be on the demands on Devon as a system in order to meet the financial challenges that Sam and I'm sure Bill later will outline in the paper. So I'm not saying that it's going to have an impact, positive or negative. I'm just saying that the risk you're assessing at the moment may well change when we have the final outcome of the settlement from the budget, and that will come out in the planning guidance. So just a note, I guess, for the board to understand that the position is as of now. But that may well change in some way, shape or form once we get the more detailed guidance for planning for next year.
Thanks, that's really useful context, Mark. Any other questions for Sam Frank?
It's just one about ambulances. I'm always interested in things we don't know about, and we know what the time spent in front of a hospital is. What we don't, and I've asked this question before, seem to know is how much time is spent with patients trying to avoid going somewhere or doing something. You know, my military background, when something acute happened, you either stay and play or lift and shift, and they have an impact on the availability of that resource. So I had a patient, and I won't go into massive detail, but they didn't want to go to hospital. They asked a question of the system. They got put onto 111. Ambulance sent out. The ambulance spent 3.5 hours trying to tell them to go to hospital when they didn't want to go, and they were asking a different question. And this was this weekend. How much resource is held up by time spent with patients? I don't think we have sight of that, and I don't know if that is an issue as well.
Anthony.
Chair, I can respond to that. SWAS do have that information, and we can certainly ask them to update and circulate it to board members. It's a significant amount of time that's either spent at scene or actually going through the machinations of care coordination. And part of the work we've tried to do this year is to simplify that for crews out on the road, but also to remove some of those non-value added steps for them as well. But certainly I'll ask SWAS to update that, and we can share with the board so you can see that. It also then features in terms of, you know, our learning coming out of winter in terms of how we would recommission care coordination going forward. That simple point of having one single point of access is very easy to say, but it's very difficult for crews to access sometimes those services. But also, I think we're not cited on some of the interventions they put in place to stop people coming into a hospital, and I think we need to be more cited of that. But I'll certainly take that forward.
Thanks, Anthony. Lincoln.
Thanks. I was very interested in the UEC and the elective situation. The assurance is still limited. It hasn't changed. And reading the next paper, I think, which is about winter planning. So traditionally, some of those pressures, so if we're not in a good place, then winter adds more pressure. So what I wanted to know was, to what extent do you have buffers that are built in? I know there's a confidence that says we will probably hit the target come March, but what buffers do we have, given that even those that are achieving are just barely achieving? You know, there isn't a place where there's overperformance in one area to maybe balance underperformance. And it's just a sense of what are the contingencies that are built in. If one goes off trajectory, what other measures do we have in place to boost our overall performance?
So I pick that one up. Thank you. So I think the two separate elements there. From a UEC perspective, we'll come on to that a little bit in terms of the winter plan. So, you know, how we describe surge capacity and how much when we use that and the points with which we activate it. Whether that's a buffer or actually whether that just helps us get through winter, I think is a debatable point. But certainly that is in our winter plan as a contingency. And Colin is going to, who's the author of the winter plan, is going to talk a little bit around some of that and how that maps through to a refreshed set of waterfalls in terms of our understanding of what the pressures will be across winter. I think in terms of the elective elements, well, part of that is about ring fencing capacity, and I know we don't talk about ring fencing in those terms as much, but making sure we've got very clear understanding of what our capacity is going to be across a heightened winter period, and making sure those are in place as well. Everything is based on, though, you know, modelling the understanding and the assumptions we have at that point in time. But what we are very conscious of is that things can change. We are modelling as much as we can into the future, but recognise we'll need to course correct as well. And I think that's part of the elements within the winter plan, which we'll describe, is you can have a very good plan, but actually more importantly is your ability to course correct and also add mitigations as you need to as well.
Thanks, Anthony. Liz.
Just like to build on that, particularly in relation to elective care, because I know that's something that the public get very concerned about in terms of the urgent emergency care pressures having an impact on capacity, and that's why some of the innovations that we've been putting in place through the One Devon plan, so optimising things like the Nightingale, which offers protected capacity that we absolutely need to optimise and use our clinical team to do it, but also the increasing amount of day surgery that's done that enables people to be seen and treated and discharged home on the same day with access to community care. And those developments help protect us around the elective care risks as we go into winter, which are very real.
Thank you, Liz. Are there any other questions for Sam or any observations on the NOF4 report? I've got just some input from Graham Clark, who isn't in the meeting at the moment. That Graham, do you just want to say, we appreciate these are month 6 numbers that we've got in the NOF4 report, and just wants us to put a marker down relating to the emergent financial risk, which is flagged up in the Chief Executive's report earlier. So we'll just make a note that we've noted that. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Steve?
It was only just by sort of rounding off the discussion. Of course, the winter does play into this, so we'll come on to that in a bit more detail. But I guess to reassure the board that whilst we know things are very, very tight, firstly, we tried to plan at the beginning of the year, I think for the first time, for winter within our annual plan. So there was some recognition of the fact that we know things get difficult, and our trajectory has reflected some of that. There's been additional work done since then, as you'll know, around the 6 programmes that's been led by our Director of Transformation, as well as additional actions that each of the localities are taking. I think, kind of in summary, what I would say for all areas, UEC in particular, given the winter, we remain focused as a system on ensuring that we deliver on the expectations. Not, if I can be so bold as to say, because they are not for exit, but because they are really important to patients. And actually, that's what the whole system remains focused on going through the winter, whether you're waiting electively or you're waiting for an ambulance. So there's some worry as we go into the winter, but actually I get a real sense that the organisations are all working really strongly together to try and get through it in absolutely the best shape possible. And in the end, as well as wanting to ensure we've done our very best against those formal exit criteria, actually having confidence amongst ourselves about how we're managing as a system, and that reflecting outwards will also help with those discussions that we'll have in Q1 25-26. So it was really just a recognition for CEO colleagues and all of the executive teams across Devon. Everybody is focused on these issues now for absolutely the right reasons, and in doing so, I don't want to overstate my confidence, but we remain on the pitch to also exit NOF4 in Q1 next year.
Thank you, Steve. So if there's no more questions, let's just summarise each of the 5 domains and the assurance that the report's giving us. So on strategy, we've got a satisfactory assurance, improving from limited. On leadership, no change to the satisfactory assurance. UEC and elective both remain at limited assurance in the report, and there's been no change there from last month. And we have finance with no change on a satisfactory assurance. So let's record those for the minutes. The board, therefore, is asked to agree those individual assurance levels relating to the achievement of the NOF4 exit, and to take assurance that adequate plans are in place to mitigate the risks relating to the delivery of planned progress to deliver NOF4 exit and to the management of the risks identified at plan stage. Are we happy to agree that? Okay, thank you very much. And we now move on to the winter plan, and we welcome Colin Bradbury into the meeting. Welcome, Colin, but I'll hand over to Anthony to take us into the winter plan report.
Thank you. I guess a sign of a healthy system would be actually where you have one annual plan and actually you don't need a winter plan. That being said, we are very conscious of the huge numbers of variables that actually affect our performance and patient care across the winter period. So I'm very pleased that Sam will be joining us and has got winter in his job title going forward. But I think one of the things we've tried to do this year is to have a very system-wide approach to winter planning. And I'm very grateful for partners for their participation across the wider health economy, both from our integrated providers, but also from local authority and from other agencies to develop this plan. I make no apologies that it is quite a long document, but I think it needs to be, because it tries to articulate our approach, but also some of the mitigations that are in place. But also, as I said previously, a plan is one thing. The ability to actually provide additional mitigations to course correct and actually to learn lessons as we go through the winter period is really, really important for us. Colin joined us earlier this year and has been involved in a number of work streams in relation to our urgent and emergency care programmes and has been holding the pen on the winter plan for a number of months. What I'd like him to do is just to give us a brief flavour of that work, and as this is a very live document for us, some further updates in relation to this particular document and how we will be taking it forward across the winter period. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Chair, and morning, everyone. Just to build on Anthony's introduction, the plan's been developed in partnership across the system over the last few months with senior representatives from the NHS, but also local authority, NHS England, and the VCSE. As Anthony also said, it's intended to be a live document to be developed and updated as we go along, but very much grounded in the operational plan, as Steve already alluded to. I'll take the paper as read. You'll see the structure of the document. It attempts to answer a series of questions about learning from last year, where we are in terms of our understanding of the causes of winter pressure, how well our locality plans are set up to respond to that pressure, where we can also add additional system mitigations at a strategic level, the work that's been done to strengthen our system coordination centre, the process by which we may make recommendations about any spend of additional winter money, although that is unfortunately a receding hope at this point, as I don't think there's any winter money on the horizon. And also, I think importantly, the success criteria. So rather than retrospectively trying to then do a post-mortem on the plan, say how well did we do, we've tried within the winter planning team to prospectively set out the success criteria, and that's contained within the document. Given the liveness of the plan, I think a couple of things to say. Firstly, in terms of since the plan was submitted, further work's been done to identify additional mitigations on bed pressures, and although inevitably bed pressures will be challenging over this winter and every winter, I think our mitigations have shown some significant reductions in the assumptions in the waterfall that you see within the pack, and we have further waterfalls broken down by each month and provided that I'm happy to share and talk through the board members offline if that's helpful. We've been very careful to be conservative and avoid double counting of any benefits, but I think there are some improved projections within the model. And also the other work that's ongoing, as Anthony has already mentioned, is around the System Coordination Centre with the appointment of a winter director, but also a system workshop, I believe, is set up for next month around escalation protocols. And there's a recommendation in the paper itself for the Finance and Performance Committee to do a review of SCC recommendations. The only other thing I'd say before pausing for question and comment, Chair, is just to say we had the last winter planning team meeting this Tuesday, and one of the things that we all know drives a great deal of pressure over winter is things like spikes in flu and COVID. The COVID and flu vaccination programmes are making good progress within Devon. The board may already be aware of this, but we're in the top 10 nationally in terms of rollout, and also understand overall staff vaccinations are better at this point this year than they were last year. So we've got an improving picture on some of the measures to ameliorate the excess pressure within the system. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over back to the Chair.
Thanks, Colin. Any questions for Colin? I think I'll have Martin first.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, really good document, actually. And when I first read it, I was quite keen to see the escalation actions, which I think came out later. And I was quite reassured, actually, that those are pretty robust. I suppose my question was, and you touched on it, I think, with the training you mentioned, you know, how far are those being sort of understood and rolled out and owned in the different organisations? Because, you know, sometimes that sort of business continuity planning approach is great, but sometimes doesn't take off when it needs to. So that was the first question. Second question was around the System Control Centre, SCC. I see, you know, the proposed hours are 8 till 6, and, you know, been fortunate enough not to be an exec on call for a few years now, but when I did, you know, inevitably problems seem to happen sort of between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night rather than, you know, during the day. So I just wondered any flexibility or, you know, if there's any thought that that could be extended a bit more out of hours if it was needed.
I'll pick both of those up. We've got actually a series of workshops. We've already had one with our on-call management teams in the ICB. And we've got a further session planned with our directors and other general managers, and similar events happening within our provider organisations. Firstly, to really understand those escalation actions, but also to stress test them as well. I think actually probably this week we're doing a bit of stress testing in a live scenario, but actually just to make sure people do understand what the expectations are, actually what resources they can pull on and what support is available as well. And I think one of the lessons that came out of last year is for people to fully understand they're not on their own, but actually that, you know, this should be a supportive environment and supportive system, and to be able to draw in extra help when need to be. The SCC downstairs, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to do a tour for board members who've not had the opportunity to visit. Is a very interesting hive of activity. It is only operational from 8 to 6, but that is 7 days a week. But it's supplemented with on-call manager and an on-call director, and both of those have an active role out of hours. They are not just sitting there waiting for calls. We have looked at additional hours, and it's certainly something we are thinking about, but we're not able to commit beyond 8 to 6 at the moment. That being said, we've had a good long look at our on-call arrangements, and by actually making sure the SCC is functional during core hours, it actually lessens the reliance on on-call during that time, so they can focus on those out-of-office periods as well.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm going to bring in Alison next, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. And the report is looking a lot better and stronger, which is really great to see. Just 2 points, if I may. One is it states in the introduction that not all of the trigger information has yet been received from the trusts, and that is critically important to get ahead of the curve during escalation. So just a bit of a plea, really, that is accelerated and those triggers are identified and agreed with the ICB early. And the second thing is there always has been winter funding, and I think, you know, the mood music is probably quite clear that there won't be winter funding from this year. And I am concerned that that means that there is no resource for additional capacity in primary care. And if primary care is struggling, then we know that all roads lead to the front doors of the hospitals. I'm just wondering what the contingency arrangements will be if primary care is really struggling throughout winter, if there isn't any additional resource to help them.
Thanks, Alison. That's useful. I'll perhaps just bring in Anthony or Colin to respond to that, but then I'd like to bring in Frank on the primary care angle there as well, please.
Certainly, yes. We've certainly requested those triggers again this week, and from what we have seen, we've actually had some dialogue with individual organisations about the quality of their submissions, because actually it's not just about what they submit, it's actually about whether they're actually going to do anything. We are assured that we will be getting those in this week, and they'll feature in hopefully the last iteration of this document for the time being. But I think also it's making sure that we've got had the opportunity to stress test those with organisations as well, and it's not just a meaningless set of triggers. Actually, it does have some validity. So we've chased those this week. In terms of the primary care element, I know that Frank will talk about that a little bit, but actually we have found some funding already, but it is very limited, and we do recognise that. We are working with primary care as closely as we can just to understand what that looks like across winter, actually, and if there are any further opportunities. We haven't identified any yet, but we are certainly looking.
Thanks, Anthony. Frank.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to Alison for picking up the primary care part, because I obviously noticed it in the paper, but I had assumed that part of this was about collective action and not sure how primary care would engage. I think primary care will engage, but it's very difficult to stand things up very quickly. You have to actually get access to staff and things. And winter planning, my request would be for next year, please can be primary care be part of the whole system commissioning in this. My only other thought, and this is a winter plan rather than an extreme situation plan, but we had 1 day of snow last week. If we had 5 days, could the system survive and manage? Or if we had a flu epidemic where you'd had a mutation and we had 30% of the staff off, could we do that? So that might be planned somewhere else, but those are things that could happen.
Thanks, Frank. So, Anthony, Colin, do you want to come back on those, and particularly perhaps around just the mitigation around collective action and an escalation in primary care would be useful.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, if I could start, I mean, on the collective action, the winter planning team does have a risk register of which collective action is one of the issues, and that's been attended to regularly. There is also senior primary care representation on the winter planning team, and has been from the outset. I think in terms of the risks around weather and flu, obviously those are risks we carry into the winter. All systems do. Again, the winter planning team looked at this on Tuesday when it last met, and the national surveillance data on the pattern of flu infection so far, touch wood, is looking fairly on course. So we're not seeing any exceptional levels of infections at the moment, but of course that could change, and that is a risk that we carry. Adjacent to that as well, there are other risks that are being attended through the clinical input into the group, such as particularly infection prevention and control. And John Trevaines has been very active on the winter planning team in trying to ensure that we've got good plans across the board to ensure there is a reduction or a minimisation of IPC issues this winter.
Thanks, Colin. Next, I've got Penny and I've got Tandy. We'll come to Penny first, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, thank you, Colin. You've taken one of my points, because that work that's been done within the IPC community, infection prevention control community, is vital, and we were really early doors with that. Obviously, there will be different alert organisms which may require variation in response, but hopefully we'll smooth out any unwarranted variation. I think it's really to emphasise the whole purpose of this plan is around clinical safety, clinical effectiveness, but also to really push into clinical optimisation. So what I've seen differently in some parts of the system is that real clinical buy-in. And I note the work that Anthony Helmsley did in terms of supporting the work. Under 3.7, National Guidance and Planning, you make reference to two key documents, which are the Winter and H2 Priority Letters, September 22, but also how to maintain safety in temporary escalation spaces. What's been quite noticeable this year is the correspondence arising from the national team has been co-authored across both operations, but also signed by Medical Director and the CNO. And I think that's a really important step forward. I'm not sure still this plan represents the amount of clinical engagement that has been involved, and I know you've been really active on that. So I don't see that jumping out from the words sometimes, so I wanted to reinforce and reassure the board that that has taken place.
Thanks, Penny. That's really helpful. So I'll go to Tandy and then I'll come to Judy. Tandy.
Thanks. I've got 3 points. The first is the general. I think some of the things we're trying to do in here are, quite aspirational. Stuff like we want to ensure that we've got to a point where we can move or deploy staff across the system from one to the next, and accepting that might be a little bit risky given where we're at now. But it does also say in there that RDU, and it feels as if they're the only ones, but you might correct me there, have sort of made a memorandum of understanding around staff passport. Could you explain a bit more if and why the other four have not? second point is around flu and COVID. Again, it mentions RDU as providing both flu and COVID vaccines to their staff. Is it just them and not the other 4? And if the other 4 are only providing flu, what's the decider between which one of the 2 they should provide? And I'm suspecting that COVID probably might have a bigger impact on patient and staff than flu would, but I could be wrong. Finally, on your key actions of recommendation, you said you want to check or make sure that mental health providers have got their own winter plans. And I'm wondering whether we're a little bit late on that one, as in, should we have been making sure that that is the case last year so they can have it now in that sense? So that's all.
Thank you, Tandy. Colin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks. In terms of the locality sections of the plan, I think those have been written and owned by the locality partners, and therefore inevitably they tend to emphasise certain pieces of work more than others. So the absence of some of those issues within the text isn't, I think, indicative of the full picture. So, for example, in terms of staff vaccinations, I'm absolutely assured that every provider is following those same processes. It's just that the localities wanted to sort of draw some of that out in one particular case. In relation to mental health, Live Well South West, Devon Partnership Trust and the Mental Health and Learning Disability Network have been involved very closely within the winter planning process and have drafted the section within the plan. I should say as well, apologies, I should have mentioned in the introduction, this document is essentially a system-wide amalgamation. We have gathered within the winter planning team the individual provider plans for winter for each organisation as well, and we have that in a library within the system, and this plan draws on those documents to summarise, but sometimes in that sort of summary level we lose some of the detail. So very happy again to take any further detail offline to give you assurance if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Judy.
Thank you. I wasn't going to comment except to say that I think it's good to see how our winter plan matures each year. This feels much stronger than what we've had before, so well done to everyone. I was just reflecting on what Alison just said about the lack of winter pressures money, and how I heard it was a suggestion that might make the primary care situation worse. As far as I understand, most of our winter's money has been used always on schemes out of the hospitals. We had one scheme from primary care last year on admission avoidance, which was good, but primary care didn't generally get the winter pressures money, and indeed Bill initiated a review of quite a lot of the winter pressures schemes we'd done. So although primary care is fragile and collective action makes this a really anxious issue, risk, I don't think they were getting lots of money in previous years.
So, Anthony, let's just explore that a little bit around the winter pressures money and the focus on the acute care rather than on primary care.
Well, last year we actually invested across the whole system, and there were a number of different schemes that equated to 13.8 million. We reviewed each of them, and actually some of them were very good, some of them weren't, and actually we went through quite a robust process to either stop those that actually didn't add any value or to look at alternative ways of providing same services. That being said, this year there isn't that level of investment, but some elements we have been able to look at. We have put small amounts into primary care in addition, but that's focusing on really sort of tests of change so that we might be able to build into commissioning, for next year as well. But certainly, the approach that we've put in within this paper is we are always told there's no winter funding, but actually what we wanted to do was have a process if money does become available, that actually we've got a robust process to put something in place quickly. But within the plan, we're not counting on that at all. And that's the approach that we've taken this year.
Thanks, Anthony. I'll just bring Steve in on this point as well, please.
Yeah, well, I think there's a real strong theme, and I think it is something as we evolve our winter planning, we need to think more around the role and support for primary care, whether or not there's money and whether or not that money gets spent in the place we need to. I think some of the work that Anthony briefly alluded to with the PCNs around finding some financial support that will go in and support some of our most challenged PCNs. It takes us so far this winter, but I think we'd all share the anxiety that fundamentally the foundation of our UEC system is out in the communities, largely primary care, although not solely primary care. I guess in terms of some reassurance about how we're going to move forward into next year. So we know we had our 6 programmes this year, which were largely clinically driven programmes, but I think dealt with pieces of the problem in terms of an out-of-hospital response. The work that we're now doing around the six goals work, largely the stuff that we've lifted from Wales, is fundamentally a shift towards a home-first ethos from next year, which will have primary care in its widest sense, and actually VCSE much more at the heart of it, and thinking much more comprehensively about what that looks like. I have to say, not just for winter, because whilst things do get more pressurised in the winter, as we all know, we never seem to come out of it in the way that perhaps we're used to as a system. So I would just give some assurance that we've started that work. The Discovery report, which is looking at that in depth, it will be coming to the execs before Christmas, and then we're going to start to build that comprehensive programme going into next year. But I think it's a point well made. We've got to build it from that point.
Thanks, Steve. That's helpful. I've got a lot of questions from Graham, but most of them have been covered in the questions of other board members, actually. But there's one which probably hasn't. So he's just asking, is social care signed up to this winter plan? Are the local authorities signed up? He couldn't see explicit references to that in the plan.
Well, certainly there's been social care input within the winter planning team. And we've had equivalent plans shared within the repository of the overall system planning information. Yep.
Yeah, Penny.
And obviously, Colin, you presented at the System Quality Group just on Tuesday, which was gender focused on adult social care. So attendees actually were given opportunity to contribute.
Thanks, Penny. Any other questions for Anthony or Colin on the winter plan? If not, then we are asked to take assurance that the 24-25 winter plan is compliant with national requirements, that adequate escalation frameworks are in place, and that the remaining risks are understood with appropriate mitigations in place. And we're asked to agree, or we're suggesting that we agree that the Finance and Performance Committee should undertake a detailed review of the system coordination arrangements in place for winter 24-25, and I think we're proposing to do that in the December meeting, aren't we? Yes. Yeah. Steve.
It was just to pick up Alison's point. I wonder whether we need to tweak, I think it was the second recommendation, to recognise we haven't had all the trigger point information at the time of writing, and our assurance is subject to getting those in adequately.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, and thank you, Alison, for that point. Okay, we can now move on to item 4.2, which is the intensive and assertive outreach review, and I'm going to come to Peter to take us into that item.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll take the paper as read, but set some context if that is okay. So, on the back of a very sad national high-profile case in Nottinghamshire, NHS England asked systems to participate in a stock take of services that are designed for those members of our population who have suffered serious mental health issues and finding it difficult to engage with follow-on services, what service provision there are to actively case find and ensure contact with those individuals. The ICB asked our Mental Health, Learning Disability and Neurodiversity Collaborative to undertake that stock take with providers on our behalf to reflect that information back to NHS England, and the request was also that that information was considered at the board. The details of the stock take are found, so high level 30% of patients deemed in the vulnerable group by NHS England are currently seen by service provision. There was a request to describe what might need to be in place to change that to 100% of potential vulnerable groups. That was part of the NHSE request, and that's included in information for the paper. The bit about risk is to recognise that, of course, there is not a direct correlation and straight line risk between having 100% service provision and the risk of a homicide or similar event happening again because of the vulnerability of this type of patient population. And so the risk essentially stays the same as the risk before the stock take was done. There is a recognition there is a national gap in provision here. Our soft intelligence suggests that Devon is not an outlier compared to other ICBs and who would have similar level of service provision. There are some recommendations about some things that can be done with a relatively immediate effect and little or no cost to strengthen the current engagement. And as I've mentioned, there are some proposals for longer term solutions. But clearly there is not yet a source or route to funding for those. The request is that we understand the data as a board and that we support the Mental Health, Learning Disability and Neurodiversity Collaborative to undertake further work to further describe what else could be done subject to either national or system funding being available.
Thank you, Peter. Frank?
I think that this paper is really important. These are the people with the most significant mental health problems. And I know full well how difficult it is to engage with them. But we're saying there's 420 of them in Devon who aren't getting any sort of clinical support at the moment. I know the optimum is to have 10 or 15 people on a caseload, but until we can get to that sort of point, how can we provide some sort of oversight of these people? I mean, if you looked at a caseload of 40, you have got half a day a month to try and engage with them. Not all of them will be intensive at that time. So now that we've identified this, how can we provide some oversight for them? Because it's not just about whether they're potentially homicidal. You know, it's the issue of their own care and whether they're suicidal or whatever.
Peter?
Frank, I wouldn't disagree with anything that you said, and inevitably this patient cohort as described by NHS England will contain a whole spectrum of individuals that will have higher or lower risk of ongoing illness, which, as you say, is more important potentially to them, and the risk to the population is generally low. And I think it's important to continue to assert that. The work of the Mental Health Collaborative is to, I think, to describe the subject matter experts, to describe how to de-risk this as much as they can within the current envelope of resource, be it finance or indeed workforce, which is often, as you know, as much a constraint as money. And I think that that's the work that we should ask them to further do and report back.
Thanks, Peter. So I've got Martin, Judy, Liz and Tandy wanting to come in. I'll start with you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's probably moot, actually, given totally support your proposal to ask the team to do further work on it anyway. But, you know, my original question was, you know, the caseload of 10 to 15, is that some sort of national thing? I wasn't quite sure where that came from and if there was any middle ground, you know, to gain some benefit without jumping straight to that. And also, I also wondered, having read it, whether that was, you know, I know it's not the sole thing and we're going to look elsewhere, but when the people are sort of hard to contact, hard to find, whether this was, you know, more practitioners was truly the only answer, whether we need to do more sort of, I don't know what the word is, on the street sort of work to try and bring these people into the fold, as it were. But I'm sure it will all come up in the review anyway.
If I could just respond briefly to the last point, because I think it is really important to, one of the benefits of, I'm going to ask them to rename themselves because it's very long, but the collaborative, I'm going to call them at this point, is that it is truly a system-wide collaborative which includes the voluntary sector, which, as you say, is a route to perhaps providing more support beyond the capacity of health.
Thanks, Peter. Judy?
Thanks. I'm pleased, and I agree that you should commission this programme. I felt it was a little bit vague on timescale, and I think it would be a good idea not to put you on the spot now, but to have some real time targets on this. I was then, when you presented, a little more concerned because of the funding issue, it just bothers me. I think we need to get on top of this quite quickly. And I think it looks like another area that's perhaps ripe for new ways of working, different models of care, not just by bringing in other sectors, but by reviewing the way in which this service is best provided by a range of different individuals.
Yeah, I've got some questions from Graham, and he also just flags up, you know, if we got a good enough understanding of the financial implications and the constraints of finances in moving this forward. So if you want to take Judy's point and Graham's point, that would be great, Peter. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the point that I made at the beginning about this is that we are not doing this as a system in isolation. This is part of a national stock take, and so one would assume and expect that once the national stock take has been completed, there will be an understanding of whether there is unwarranted variation across systems, or whether this is a gap in national provision, and therefore that should dictate a thought on further resource if that's going to come down. So I think the timing, I would take the point that we need to make sure that we are doing our own assessment of new ways of working and how we could optimise this in conjunction with that national stock take and any results that would come out of there.
Thanks, Peter. And the national stock take is quite important, I think, in context of the recommendations that we're going to come to shortly. And particularly, I mean, you and I had an exchange of emails around my concern around how we're setting the level of residual risk at a level that the board can be comfortable with. But I think the context of the national stock take helps us to get some assurance on that when we've got the national picture, doesn't it? So and that's a helpful exchange that we've had. I've now got Liz, I think, next, and then Tandy, and then Frank.
Thank you, and thank you for the paper. We had the opportunity, didn't we, to review this with the collaborative at the beginning of the week. I was involved in the initial rollout of assertive outreach, and I think one of the things we need to pay attention to alongside the caseload numbers is what are the conditions that make it more effective? Because often it's about relationships and making it easy for the person to get the help that they need. Because often they have complex needs. It's about housing, it's about employment, it's about building social relationships. So I do think there is just something about how we make it the easiest thing for people to access the help that they need. And often it's about the relationship with one or two people. And the other bit I think is really critical in all of this is how you engage with families, because that is another factor that I think makes a huge difference in terms of the person's ability to engage with and get the help that they need, because the numbers are one thing, but reality is you've got to create those right conditions as well.
Thanks. Is there anything you want to add to that, Peter? Or
yeah, well-made points and were made in the collaborative discussion, so thank you, Liz.
Okay, thanks. Tandy.
Yes, I'm pleased that you've mentioned in there the involvement of friends and family, but I do think that it's also quite important that we specifically also consider mentioning the voluntary sector in the longer, even the shorter term plan, because I think they are quite critical in making sure that this actually happens. I'm assured because you did mention the voluntary sector in your narrative, but I didn't see it in the report, and I was sort of just thinking, actually, this is one of those areas where bringing in the voluntary sector might make quite a big difference, especially if we're talking of reducing workloads from 40 to 10 to 15. And I wasn't very sure that I understand what's going to happen to the 16th person, to the 40th person, whether we've got a plan for that, or we'll create a service that's really good for the 10 to 15, but then the 16 to 40, not very sure what's happening to them. The second point, I think that maybe we could also consider digital in there as maybe one of the ways that we could probably support the 16 to 40 people. So just considering whether digital could be one ways of sort of making sure that we don't drop off people. And then the issue of the cap on the caseload, what's the sequencing on that? At what point are we sort of going to sort of feel confident that we've got enough workforce and therefore we can cap? What's going to start there? Thanks.
Thanks, Tandy. I think these are all really important points that I'm happy to feed into the work. I mean, it feels that I don't have the solution at the moment, and I think the right answer is to ask the subject matter experts who understand the context better than I do to come up with a piece of work that will incorporate all the points that you've asked. So I'll make sure that happens.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter and Frank.
One of the important things about this is culture, because when people are pressurised and someone doesn't engage, it's very easy to sort of accept and go, oh, well, they're discharged. These people need help and support. And when my children were at school, there was this really good special needs department. And I remember looking at this sign saying, if they can't learn the way you teach, can you teach the way they learn? And it's exactly the same. So if they can't engage the way we deliver services, can we deliver services the way they engage? And that's what we need to do.
Thanks, Frank. Peter, anything you want to add to that before we...
It was a very good soundbite, and I shall leave it at that. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Peter. Right, so if there's no further questions on this, we're asked to agree that NHS Devon should commission a programme of work in partnership with the MHLDN Collaborative to understand and improve the current position and delivery of intensive and assertive community mental health treatment services, designing a sustainable, deliverable and effective target operating model for at-risk population in Devon. Are we happy to agree that? Secondly, we're asked to endorse immediate minimal cost actions for providers including Devon Partnership Trust and Liverpool South West to implement immediate low-cost interventions that address urgent needs within the current system. Are we happy to endorse that? Steve?
Just one minor tweak, I think, to pick up the point that Judy made, which is in the first one. Perhaps we can put some timescales around when we want that report back. So it wouldn't be that we've got a service, but we've got a report telling us what we need to do for the long term. Can we think of some timescales for that? The board ask for that to come back as a matter arising.
Yeah, are we happy to add that to the agreement? And then finally, we're asked to note the inherent risks and requirement for robust risk management, recognising that despite enhanced governance and programme improvements, the inherent risks associated with this high-risk group cannot be entirely mitigated. Strong governance and risk monitoring are essential to manage and respond to residual risks effectively. Are we happy to note that? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to item 4.3, which is the adoption of the Safe Learning Environment Charter. Piers Tetley has produced the report. He's not in the meeting today, so I'm going to come to Penny to introduce that item. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you, Chair, and it's with pleasure actually that I present this report, because this is very much focused on the safe learning environment for students, and that's all students coming into the NHS in Devon. And I was aware of this work, and it came out of the South West actually, and it was within recognition that we have the people promise and we've got the NHS workforce plan, but actually that doesn't talk to students' needs. And there were increased reports of us not being able to suitably or attract suitable numbers of people into the professions. And then if we do attract them, we're not able to retain them. And this is a national and regional position, and it does play through in Devon as well. So this is around making sure that there is a proper arrangement and charter and framework around those students' experience. The purpose is to listen, to make sure all of the benefits of the broader people promise that are delivered for staff are delivered for students. So I thoroughly recommend it actually for adoption. Having said that, it doesn't talk very well to primary care, and so it does really pick up about the commitments from our providers. So I do recommend that it is adopted, but that some further work is undertaken.
Thanks, Penny. Judy.
Thanks very much, Penny, and I am very supportive of this and delighted that it's been allocated to the People and OD Committee tomorrow. it does feel measure-free. So when I looked at the extremely good diagram with all the areas that are important, how do we decide how much time and space for learning is a good thing or not? And so as it goes forward, I feel we need to start saying what is good and what is not good. And I don't know if that's happening nationally, which it may be. But at the moment, it's a kind of motherhood and apple pie document. And I'm very fond of motherhood and apple pie. But occasionally, we just need some clarity on what our measures are.
Penny.
So we need to feed that back to peers. I think that's absolutely right. And of course, some of the metrics may well be looking at your student attrition rate, for example. And we know, for example, in student nurse training that there tends to be attrition in year 2. So if we could start to look at that, there's net survey results and so forth. So if we could apply data that's already there to this.
Steve.
It was just on that point, yeah, it's very easy to sign up to charters, isn't it? And then we all sign it and we sort of move it or we forget it. We will take back to exec team. I think picking up Penny's point, I'll ask peers to bring something back which sets out what was success look like, how will we know we've been successful, and then we can use that as part of the quarterly monitoring through the committee meeting to show that we are on track.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Any other? Martin?
Yeah, sorry, just to follow up, I suppose as well as success measures, there may be some actual tangible actions that might need to be taken, whether it's changing policies or recruitment practices or, how we sort of appraise students or whatever it is. But, certain things just slightly change the culture might be required to implement some of these, which are very cultural actually as well as specific.
Any other questions for Penny or observations? Oh, sorry, Lincoln.
Yeah, I was just thinking our experience as a training location for public health training, that there is through our professional bodies a certain amount of standards and measures and indeed external body checks. So it might be useful with the RCN. GMC will certainly have. So working with them on, what's those kinds of accreditations and standards that we need to apply.
So to briefly respond, this work has been co-produced with NHS England Workforce Training Education Team, and of course they have a process of student, you'll be well aware, obviously within provider is that they come in and actually do surveys of the environment, and actually it came up as an action of this week's SQG to tie that into our quality metrics.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions on this, we welcome the Safe Learning Environment Charter. So thanks, Penny, and thanks to peers for bringing it to us. We're asked to agree that NHS Devon should become a safe learning environment organisation and that we sign up to the Safe Learning Environment Charter. Are we happy to agree that? I think there's an action coming out of this that perhaps we formally remit this to the People and OD Committee to look at the design of metrics around this and also tangible actions to take this forward. And then pick this up again at the board in a report from that committee. Is everyone happy to proceed in that way? Excellent. So we've now reached the point in the meeting where we have a break for 10 minutes. So if we can stop the live stream and Josh, are we live? Thank you, Josh. Thanks. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're now moving into the section on governance, performance and assurance reports, and we start with the quality report. And Penny, over to you to take us into that, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report will take as read, and also to note that it's had prior consideration at the Quality and Patient Experience Committee. I'll talk primarily, therefore, to the executive summary. So the report is in accordance with the NQB guidance, which informs all of our quality reporting into board. And so looking at those domains, safety, PSAF, so the incident management system, so the patient incident and response framework model is progressing well, and there are no issues of particular escalation other than John Trevain's enhanced focus around primary care, and John Trevain's is now attending the primary care committee to bring senior leadership into that space. Never events, however, and Liz, you'll be cited on the increased number of never events, primarily in Torbay. Torbay are working with partners across Devon and broader to look at preventative action going forward. Never events, they should be never events, so we shouldn't underestimate actually the significance of them. What I would say is the candour that the chief nurse has shown in sharing promptly with us, and also the rigour of response has been noted. But we do need to keep a really close to Torbay on that. In terms of UEC, we've had long discussion around urgent emergency care already in this space today. Peter and I are working increasingly closer. I'm really pleased Peter's in post, and being able to bring both a nursing and medical perspective to the consequence of long waits, but also, as I mentioned earlier, about how we optimise, how we help those clinicians optimise their practice, particularly in relation to internal professional standards and so forth. And that's been one of the really significant things that have helped the UHP plan. But we are very cited on the fact that the 8-hour reports have significant scrutiny outside of the provider, and we're working closely with Anthony. In terms of safeguarding, there's much going on in safeguarding, but of particular note in this reporting period, there was the ILACS inspection for local authorities. So there is all of the safeguarding regulatory inspections have a multi-agency perspective to it. So although this was largely local authority, the key bit for us was around what we call the front door. So that's the multi-agency hub where all safeguarding referrals go in, they get triaged, then have a multi-agency response. We are likely to get feedback around capacity in Children Family Health Devon. Liz, you're well cited. There was additional funding made available by the ICB. I think we've made the appropriate strategic response to it, but it's making sure that it actually gets to the front door. Infection prevention control, again, significant work underway here. So we're working really closely now with local directors of public health and UKHSA, and leading, for example, responses around MPOX, which has had significant focus in the reporting period, but also it hasn't made it to this front sheet, but we're also doing quite a lot of work on tuberculosis. Latent TB is growing. Devon previously, low incidence of TB, latent or active, but there are growing numbers. So we're looking at our screening processes. So we've initiated the Health Protection Delivery Group, which with public health stakeholders, and that addresses things such as avian flu as well. So in terms of maternity, There is more detail within the accompanying report, but I do and have raised here before that all three of our providers are in the National Maternity Safety Support Programme. They were enrolled on that programme partially because of being inspected by CQC and found to be requires improvement, but also because of the NOF status of their own organisation and the NOF status of the system. I'm reporting into the System Improvement and Assurance Group around our processes for oversight and improvement. In terms of maternity and neonatal voices partnership, we have, as an ICB, invested further in that function. We benchmarked low, and that low level of benchmarking does actually prove, or investment does prove to be a risk to trust compliance, but we are writing and working with the CNST administrators to make sure that they understand that this is being addressed. So children, young people, of particular note, obviously we have all of the work going on around autism, which is subject to separate reporting due in January, but also there's been particular focus on the National Paediatric Audiology Service. You know, so much of this, we talk about speech and language therapy, but also audiology. These are all key bits on people's development, so fundamental, and we continue to really drive in that area. Patient experience then, so we've established our complaints team, and that will help the ICB response rate to complaints. In terms of those complaints we respond to, dental remains a real concern, and particularly dental care for children, and particularly dental care for children in care. And I'm working with where we've got corporate parenting responsibilities. So I'm working with Hannah to look at exceptional arrangements. Now, we do have good arrangements in Plymouth with the dental school. We need to make sure that we're spreading that at scale. So mortality, just briefly, my last 2 points in terms of effectiveness and outcomes. Mortality, we had significant discussion at QPEC, and Peter, in his role as Chief Medical Officer, will take back the lead for the mortality arrangements and oversight within the ICB. We're working with University Hospitals Trust, and a number of questions arised in QPEC, and we're progressing those with the Medical Director. Section 117, aftercare arrangements, so this was subject to an internal audit. These, and it really talks, Frank, doesn't it, to, you know, this continued focus we need to have for people with a mental health need. And so there was quite a lot of learning for the ICB coming from that section 117. And there is a working group established and reporting with close oversight by QPEC for an assurance point of view, and reporting to our executive committee, Ray Delivery. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Penny. Are there any questions for Penny on the points she's raised relating to the quality report? Tandy. You're on mute, Tandy.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, yeah.
I didn't have any questions, but I just wondered if I could quickly attach my report to Penny's, as I need to leave in about 5 minutes.
Yes, certainly. Thanks for reminding me of that, Tandy. Yeah, please do that, yeah.
Okay. So in the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, we broadly looked at quite a number of areas, and we are quite satisfied that there's a lot of work that is satisfactory around the quality agenda. Over the last few months, we've looked at and had deep dives around mortality, maternity, children and young people, continuing healthcare, EQIAs as well as the PSAF framework. So whilst we're sort of getting our feet on the ground around those areas, we do note some areas that we need to sort of maybe focus a little bit more, mental health being one of them, the neurodiversity and children and waiting list being another, as well as the mortality area, which we've also discussed at length. Now, on the mortality, we're sort of going to do a little bit more work to understand a little bit more, as in whether the numbers we're getting are sort of, cause for concern, or there's context around them that mean that actually it's not what it's looking like. So we've agreed to sort of progress some work around that. We've also sort of looked at EQIAs and how the committee can be cited a little bit more on EQIAs that might have a sort of bit more serious consequences. But I think that's something that Penny will look at in terms of how we could be cited on that. And then we're going to do a bit more work on cross committees, in particular with the Finance and Performance Committee, as well as the People and Organisational Development. I think we need to put in a bit more effort in terms of work that is crossing those three committees. And then we also want to follow up a bit more on organisations that are in escalation, just to sort of get to grips with any areas that are going under rapid reviews. So the committee is a bit more cited on those earlier and can have input at the right time. So TPT, TSD, and UHB. So in summary, that's what to report to the committee, but the rest of it is in the paper.
Thanks, Tandy. And before I come to Judy, before Tandy goes, are there any questions for Tandy on her report from the Quality and Patient Experience Committee? Okay, thanks for the report to Tandy. And Judy, back to the quality report.
I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to say how helpful it is to have this report regularly. I think you brought this innovation to us, and each month or each meeting, we get really clear information that helps us understand the key issues. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, really. This report's really moving forward every single time we receive it, isn't it? So thanks to you and your team. I know there's a lot of work goes into it, and thanks for that, Penny. Any other questions for Penny? In that case, are we happy to agree the overall assurance level relating to the quality position of One Devon Integrated Care System as satisfactory, and that adequate plans are in place to mitigate and improve quality risks? And just on Tandy's report, there's an action to take assurance from the report and to note the escalations for information which Tandy outlined to us before she left the meeting. Are we happy to do that? Okay, thank you very much. And let's now move on to item 5.2, which is the finance report. So over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the reports as read, and I'll go through the Integrated Care Board financial report at month 6 first, before then turning to the Integrated Care System report. Board members will note that there's a change in reporting at month 6. All of those organisations with a planned deficit received deficit funding from NHS England, so our planned deficit of £80 million becomes a break-even position, so that's why the numbers have moved quite significantly between months 5 and 6. So apologies for any confusion. I'd love to say it's because we made £80 million of savings in month 6, but that would not be the case. Having said that, I think there are reasons to be cautiously confident in terms of the financial position, both at an ICB position level and also at a system level. So in terms of the detail on the Integrated Care Board, we set an initial plan, or we submit an initial plan of £85.4 million. That was then changed through discussion with NHS England to a deficit plan of £80 million. In terms of the position for the ICB, at month 6, we're showing a surplus of £14.2 million, which is exactly on plan, and that's against that initial, that's against the revised position. And for the year end, we expect to deliver a position of £28.4 million. So while there's a break-even position overall, and you'll see this when I go through the system position, there are organisations in surplus, the ICB being one of those, and there are organisations that continue to be in a deficit financial position. That's something that will need to be addressed as we exit this financial year and also in terms of the planning process for next financial year. Again, I'm pleased to say that for the 6th month in succession, we've seen the risks that continue to be within the system in terms of the financial position reduce, and also the level of unidentified risk again reduce. So we're seeing a reasonable position in terms of the trajectory between now and the end of the year. That's not to say that there are not still risks that are unquantified. We really don't know what the impact of the winter will be, and how that will impact on demand in terms of UEC, which we've discussed earlier, and then the knock-on consequences in terms of the financial position. I won't say too much more about the ICB position. I think I'll pause there and take any questions, and then I think move on to the system position, which I think is much more important from our perspective as the system leader. So, any questions?
Any questions for Bill on the ICB financial position at month 6? Okay, so let's take the action on this now then. So we're asked to agree on the ICB financial report month 6 of the overall assurance level relating to the financial position of NHS Devon of satisfactory assurance, and that adequate plans are in place to mitigate the risks relating to the delivery of the planned savings and efficiencies and to the management of the financial risks identified at the plan stage. We should also just recall that the Finance and Performance Committee, the week before last, we had a deep discussion into these numbers, and that the committee supported that level of satisfactory assurance. Okay, Bill, the ICS finance report, please.
Okay, thank you. So, as I've alluded to in the discussion about the ICB position, the initial position that was submitted was an £85.4 million deficit. That was subsequently amended to an £80 million deficit. I'm pleased to say that we have managed to identify the difference in terms of the risk share and have disaggregated that, so that's something that will feature at the month 7 financial position. I think the major issues to highlight in terms of the position as at month 6 are the deterioration in the Torbay and South Devon Foundation Trust position, which I'll go into in some detail, but also the continuing reduction in the risk profile. The ICB has identified some one-off non-recurring flexibility which will allow the system to continue to forecast what was the £80 million deficit and what is now the break-even position, and that will not impact the financial position recurrently going into next year. So these are non-recurring flexibilities that the ICB has identified, and that follows a very detailed deep dive into accruals, provisions that have been made in previous years. So it's something that provides that one-off benefit. Having said that, we should also recall and bear in mind that that will not help with the underlying position, and it will certainly not help in terms of the exit run rate position, and a lot of detailed work is ongoing at the moment with chief finance officers in each of the provider organisations to be really clear about what impact that will have on the plan that we submitted to NHS England on the 17th of October, which proposed the £80 million deficit this year reducing to £75 million next year. And it's fair to say that there are some variances to that. Some organisations' position has improved, and some organisations, and Torbay would be one of those, has deteriorated as a consequence of that. And so the mitigation that needs to be put in place both in this year and also to deliver higher levels of cost improvement next year is something which is really important, and will come back to this board at the appropriate time. As I've said, we've received £80 million of non-recurring deficit funding, and that's phased into the second half of the year. And within the detail that sits behind the plan, you'll see there's a bridge that shows how we get from the position at month 6, which is that £15.9 million deficit, to a break-even position at the end of the year. There's still a significant amount of CIP to be delivered in the second half of the year, and rather than just taking that on trust and being reassured by each of the provider CFOs and their boards, the ICB has gone through with each of those, looking at the position now and what the actions will be that will get them back to the position that they've agreed. As a consequence of that, and also related to the fact that as part of the recovery support programme, the mandated support there required an external review of Torbay and South Devon. we've received an assurance review from Kay Bentley, the former Regional Director of Finance, which highlights the risk in Torby and South Devon. And I'll spend a few minutes on that because I think it's absolutely germane to the position and is the greatest risk that we have in terms of delivering the financial position for this year and going forward. At a locality meeting that we had back in the late summer, it was highlighted that the position in Torby and South Devon was one where the plan was about £9.2 million adrift. Following the review that was commissioned, we now believe that that's £15.5 million, and there's a few changes that we've been able to make to that, but the residual position in Torby and South Devon is a £15 million variance to the deficit plan that was already in existence. As a consequence of that, it was agreed, again as part of mandated RSP support, that a supported intervention would be done in Torby and South Devon, led by myself, and so I'm spending 2 days a week on average in Torby and South Devon, and with the support of some individuals, Sam in particular from the ICB, and also from the recovery support team. As a consequence of that, a detailed recovery plan is now in the process of being implemented. There is an improvement plan which has been signed off at the intensive support team and recovery support programme level that will be shared with regional colleagues. It's been through the necessary governance in terms of discussions with myself, with the board in Torby and South Devon, and also signed off by the improvement directors, and then that will be shared with regional colleagues in advance of the System Improvement Assurance Group meeting next month. That will require a significant level of work to be done within Torby and South Devon, and I think the findings there show that the cost improvement programme was not as robust as it might have been. Some of the detail within the cost improvement programme is very, very difficult to trace back to actual schemes that were either ready for delivery or in delivery, and the number of disconnects across the organisation in terms of the balance between financial performance, operational performance, and quality and safety. Operational performance is also a feature of the supported intervention because there are some significant concerns, and these would have been highlighted earlier in the performance report, around Torby and South Devon's ability to deliver on UEC and also to make good on its elective recovery position in the second half of the year at the same time as deliver significant savings. There will be an impact on headcount within the organisation. One of the things that has to be done, though, is to be much more sophisticated about headcount and be really, really focused on the need to reduce spend, so that the focus in TSD shouldn't be just solely on headcount. If to recruit additional staff would reduce the reliance on, for example, insourcing and outsourcing on elective recovery, or bank and agency staff, or interims, or consultancy, or locums, and they have all been areas that have contributed to significant spend. The other area, and again not very surprisingly, is a lack of grip and control within the organisation, and so a lot of the decision making is quite convoluted and takes a long time to transact, and one of the things that I've been very keen to put in place is to make sure that the organisation can respond very, very rapidly and to do things at pace, and at the same time ensure that those are appropriately governed. And so that governance is very important. Governance doesn't get in the way of the appropriate decision making that moves the organisation forward in the right way. Again, one of the key things, particularly at this point in the year, as we get closer to the winter and closer to the end of the financial year, is that the things that are done non-recurrently in the current year to get to the best possible financial position don't militate against those things that need to be done recurrently to ensure the organisation gets into a much more financially sustainable position in 2025-26 and beyond. That's the major risk, and as I said, there is a supportive intervention in that organisation to get them to the best possible position that we can do. In discussion with the regional office of NHS England, we have taken the view as an ICB, again with discussion and with the support of the recovery support programme, that this type of intervention is much more effective for the system than investigation and intervention, which has been done in a number of systems, a number of ICBs across the country, 14 I think, That would have meant the entire system would be placed into a level of investigation and intervention. A management consultancy would be appointed by NHS England at her cost. They would have done a 4-week rapid review, and then as a consequence of that, there would then be an intervention period after that. Our view, and I'm pleased to say this is something that's shared both by the Recovery Support Programme and NHS England, is that we have most of the organisations in the system either close to plan, better than plan, or slightly off plan, and that their plans are robust enough and we can take significant assurance from them that we will deliver. The focus has to be on the organisation that is significantly off plan, and that allows us to direct all of our resources to resolving that position and to get that to the best possible position that we can do. You'll see, turning back to the overall financial position, what the forecast is between now and the end of the year. We have achieved £66.6 million efficiency achievement in the first 6 months of the year. While that's £5.7 million above plan, we're still forecasting to deliver £213 million over the course of the year. So again, hopefully no surprise here, but Q3 and Q4 are the times when the delivery of cost improvement really ticks up and has to continue at that pace or an enhanced pace for us to be able to deliver. As I've said, we have bridged the financial positions of each of the organisations. We've looked at the risk that they have. We've looked at the mitigations that they're able to bring forward. We've looked at the split between recurring and non-recurring savings. I'd like it to be much more on the recurring side than it is non-recurring, but the main goal for us is to achieve the position that we have signed off, committed to, and provided assurance to NHS England that we will deliver when we met with them on the 17th of October. And I'm pleased to say that at this point in time, I remain cautiously optimistic and confident that we will be able to deliver that plan, albeit it will be a significant challenge and very tight. And at that point, I'll take any questions that the board may have.
Thanks for that very thorough summary, Bill. Really helpful. Judy.
Thanks very, very much, Bill. I love this phrase, cautiously optimistic. It kind of feels like a weighing scales. I just wanted to say that the experience of Torbay, and I remember when Liz told us it was a very high-risk goal that was set, should just remind us all how hard this is for everyone to do, that some of these decisions, these cost improvements, some of the way in which care is delivered these days is very complex. Some of it's very hard to do. And quite often we're rushing people to kind of come up with plans and take another few million out here and things. So I'm saying all that because I'm really pleased that the executives here and at Torbay decided to work together on this, because I think too often when we bring somebody in from outside, all the learning goes back to somebody outside. Whereas here with Sam and Bill and the Trust working together, the learning we get from this about how, because we are going to have cost improvement plans going forward, the learning we get from what's the best way to do this is something we can spread within the system. So I recognise that it's really tough for everybody involved, but I think the approach that we're taking, I'm hoping it feels like that for those who are actually working on it, is the best way of learning from these situations.
Thanks, Judy. Is there anything you want to add to that, Bill? Or
yeah, I mean, and absolutely agree with that. But in every financial position, there'll be things that can be improved. And at some point, I think it will be important for us to determine what could be done better. I think that, and again, definitely not to be critical, just to observe with a fresh pair of eyes in the organisation. It can be it can be quite compelling to want to do a lot of things in an organisation. I think that some of the findings in the assurance report that we commissioned would determine that Torbay has acquired a number of services. Often it's done that because it felt it was the right thing to do. So if you think, for example, on Child and Family Health Devon, that was something where there was a contract that was handed back. we don't really understand whether that's a viable entity in its current format, and that's something that is quite a cause for concern. Equally, we've talked and waxed lyrical, I think, for a long time about Torbay as an ICO and the fact that it provides social care. I think that there's increasing emerging evidence that the cost of that is driven because it's a medicalised model, so that what's happening is we're providing a medicalised level of care to clients in receipt of social care, which is means tested, and that tends to drive the cost up. Between 2021 and 2024, the cost of social care in Torbay has increased by 68%. That's way above the national average and is something that we have got a plan now to reduce. None of this will be easy. So moving back to the level that is statutorily mandated will not be popular for those clients who are in receipt of that level of care. So none of this is going to be easy. It's going to be really, really difficult, even if it's the right thing to do. So I just want to stress that so the board understands that this is going to be a very, very difficult period of time and a very difficult approach for the organisation. But I'm encouraged, certainly in the time that I've been there, by the fact that the executive team and the senior leadership in the organisation is up for the change and is very supportive of the things that need to be done to ensure that the organisation continues to be viable and continues to provide really good care for patients in Torbay and South Devon.
Thanks, Bill. So I'm going to bring in Alison and then I'll bring in Liz after that. So Alison, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a really complex sort of dynamic, isn't it? Because there is the tension between the individual organisation accountabilities and also working as a system in the best interest of the whole population of Devon. Just to sort of endorse what Steve and Bill have said, the way that the system has pulled together to try and put the right support around this is to be commended, and also the region is to be commended for holding back the national tide here, really, in terms of insisting on intervention in the circumstances. So it's not just the system working together. I think it's a good example of the system and region working well together in the best interest of the organisation as well. And also, Liz, I think, you know, all credit to your board who have flagged this and been very open to the support. I think that the tension over the next few months, and this is going to be something that this board is going to need to keep a real eye on, is the work that's being done in the here and now to get this year's outturn to the best possible place it can be, so that the exit run rate and setting the system up for next year is as good as it can be, with the need to be actively working on next year's plan. And there, I think I'm coming back, Mark, I guess, to your point made earlier, there are a lot of unknowns in terms of allocations next year. The impact that this is having on the exit run rate is possibly going to mean that next year's plan is going to have to go further, harder and faster than originally thought. Which loops me right back to the sort of the current consultation and the Darcy recommendations around the difficult choices that are going to need to be made, and how those difficult choices need to be held together as a system, and not just pushed into one individual organisation. So I think avoiding the temptation of saying, you know, 2 or 3 of these organisations over here are going to be okay, but this one organisation is going to suffer the challenges, won't be good enough. It's about how all of those organisations are going to work together to address the challenges of Devon. I know I'm stating the obvious here, Chair, but it's probably going to be a really big test for all of the boards in holding that together. And hopefully will be the one bit of evidence that will absolutely get Devon out of North 4 in terms of that collective working and system approach to, even if you can't get all the way there, demonstrate absolutely that this is a joint endeavour.
Thanks, Alison. That's really helpful to have that, to have all that insight. I'll return to that in a moment, I think, but I'll just want to hear from Liz, please. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, and absolutely recognise what Alison and Bill have both been saying. And look, it's uncomfortable, isn't it? You know, that we've got this level of challenge in an organisation. And although I'm not here in the capacity of Chief Exec, you can't help but acknowledge those particular challenges. And I do think part of moving forward in Devon has to be around having the courage to own the problem. And to know that the system will then come around an organisation to respond to it, and that's what's happened. And that, I think, is new in Devon and maybe not part of our experience. But I think, to Bill's point, we've got a lot of work to do, and we also need to be very clear about delivering on that work this year, and also making sure that we've got the right capacity, capability and leadership going forward that will enable us to embed this into a long-term future. And the appointments that are being made, including the new Chief Exec, I think represents a really positive step for the organisation in achieving that goal.
Thanks, Liz. And final comment from Martin, please.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of having had the conversation, I actually feel quite optimistic about this because, you know, whilst there's a problem, it seems like, you know, there are some structural things we can perhaps change, a different approach being brought. When you were talking about the interventions, I was thinking, well, they seem a bit internally focused. I was going to say, you know, is there anything we can do externally to do with, you know, patient flow, reducing length of stay, taking out beds for escalation of things? But it sounds like there are also issues in the community in terms of the area. But as we went through the discussion, it occurred to me if we get those right and understand them better and get the flows working, that's what we need in the community and in the hospital, might be a model that can actually help us, you know, elsewhere in the system. So I think getting underneath this, understanding it and trying to improve it actually is a massive opportunity. I'm looking forward to it. So end up on a positive.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so thanks to Bill for the work that you're doing over at TSD. Thanks, Liz, to your board, and thanks to this board for being supportive of the work that we're doing and the way we're moving forward on it. Liz, I'm just going to echo what you've just said around, you know, us needing to have the courage to own the problems when they come, and that once you've done that, actually we can start to move forward and really address it. And I just want to echo Alison's points that you know, things like this are a test of system working, a real test of system working, and as Alison's flagged, you know, there'll be a bigger test as we move through the next few months in terms of setting the plan for 25-26. So thanks to everyone for the conversation that we've just had around that. We've got an action here to agree the overall assurance level relating to the financial position of One Devon Integrated Care System as satisfactory, and to agree that adequate plans are in place to mitigate the risks relating to the delivery of planned savings and efficiencies and to the management of the financial risks identified at plan stage. Are we all happy to agree that recommendation? Thanks very much, and thanks, Bill. Let's move on to the item 5.3, the NHS Devon Annual Plan. Welcome back to the meeting. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies for my absence earlier. So this is an overview of our progress around our internal ICB annual plan, which are the objectives set out by each of our individual directorates for 24-25. It remains a self-assessment process by the directorates with check and challenge applied by the PMO on a monthly basis. Just an overview of the paper that I'll take as read. So we have 137 objectives currently, which is an increase from the 129 that we saw last month, and that is due to the inclusion of some statutory objectives within certain directorates. I note the action on the current action log for the board around the achieving a corporate level of assurance descriptors. So when I go through the assurance descriptors here, they will be changed for next year, and that has been taken forward in terms of next year's annual plan, which is already in development. So we have 70% of our objectives that are assessed as fully assured at the moment, which remains the same as it was in September. We have 31% of our objectives that are detailed as partially assured, so that is either the actions are being undertaken but we haven't seen the improvements in the data or vice versa. So that's an improvement from 20 to 31 of those objectives from the month of September. And we have 1% of our plan that currently has limited assurance. That's an improvement from 4 objectives to 1 objective in month, and that 1 objective is our requirement to develop a business case for community-based alternative admissions for eating disorders. That's a piece of work that's still ongoing, and we'll take further assurance on that in the next month. Changes to the paper from last month, so we've now included new dashboards and scorecards for each of our directorates to make it a bit easier to see where the progress is being taken at the moment. And we've also included data metrics where we have them, which is a replacement of our previous IQPR, to really try and align what was the IQPR to the work that we are trying to undertake as an ICB in the current year. What it has identified to us are that we have too many of the areas that we are undertaking as priorities that we do not have a data metric for in terms of monitoring the improvements and the impacts that we're trying to make. And we also still have a huge amount of stuff that we are monitoring in terms of data that aren't linked to some of our delivery plans. So that is a piece of work that we are really taking forward in terms of the creation of the plan for next year to make sure that that is fully aligned. As I said, next year's planning has already commenced. And we are going through directorate by directorate reviews, both in terms with Steve as CEO with check and challenge processes, but also bringing the senior teams of the organisation together to look at their priorities for next year, to be really clear where we have interdependencies or conflicts within the plan that we need to iron out before we start getting into delivery. And some of those real focuses for next year are making sure that our ICB annual plan has clear links to the operating plan. And also our ability to influence the operating plan for areas where it won't be included in the national guidance. So I'm thinking of areas such as mental health, children and young persons, learning disability, where the operating guidance will be something quite vague and broad, whereas we actually know what we need to be achieving within our system and being really clear on where those improvements need to be. So that should be our version of the operating plan for those particular areas. We need to make sure that the annual plan reflects the areas for each of our directorates and their responsibilities within the Transforming Devon programme, and also responds to the outputs of the Darcy report as well, to make sure that we are really cognisant of all of those within those areas of plan. We've asked for a real summary around business as usual next year as part of the planning, to understand, does our business as usual add value, or is it just stuff that we're doing because it's what we've always done? To be really clear around, with a smaller organisation, where are we placing our resource and how are we making the biggest impact for our population? One of the key focuses we want to have are fewer objectives next year. 137 are far too many. It's proving a bit of an impossibility to really measure, are we having the impact that we want to have as a system? So fewer objectives, greater focus, and also the ability to make sure that we have clear impact modelling for each of those is something that is key in terms of that process for developing the plan for next year. So a bit of a review of where we are now at the moment in terms of this year's plan, but I think really getting into that nitty-gritty around the focus for next year, I think is useful information for the board. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Judy.
Well done, Sam and colleagues. This progresses every time, and it's really encouraging. And I know there are glitches in it, and I know it takes a while to get this all sorted, but really good to see improvements each time. Those of us on Finance and Performance Committee had a chance to review this a week and a half ago, and I just wanted to make the point to the full board that I made then, Sam, that it would be really good if we could bring into the dashboard some comparison of resources that are going into handling these areas. I'm not saying each objective should have, a budget and number of people, but maybe starting off even by directorate, just so we can look and see whether what we did in the phase 2 restructuring is actually putting the resourcing, the staff resourcing and budgets that we have that are non-staff into areas that are priorities for us and need action in the annual plan. So no need to comment now, but I hope that message will be picked up in future versions.
Thanks, Judy. That's helpful. Any other questions for Sam? Mark?
Thank you, Chair. really good oversight. I'm not going to ask questions about the content, but maybe just something to think about in terms of the next stages of development, picking up on the comments that have just been made. I think people are aware that we've just launched the Insightful Board for ICBs, guidance that's available now. We're also undertaking a review of our own oversight framework, which will be published later in the year, hopefully alongside the new planning guidance and our new operating model, where we're trying to streamline the number of things that we're doing. So the NOF4 report you've got today, which you considered earlier, the delivery and assurance report that you've got here at the moment, the BAF, maybe there's a way of making sure that the delivery, the delivery assurance paper that you've just considered, a byproduct for that is the NOF4 sort of element, so you don't have to duplicate lots of things. So really happy to work with you and the board, and Sam in particular, around how we can how you streamline that so that you're considering things together rather than in separate pieces, which often leads to some duplication and sometimes some confusion or even conflicting messages from us about what's important and what isn't. So hopefully we'll get there in the next few weeks and months around tidying a lot of that up and making it much simpler to understand those different processes and how they come together. So.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for that context. And for anyone who hasn't seen the Insightful Board publication yet, we'll be circulating that round to all board members after this meeting, and then we'll pick up some of the points in that at the next development session. It is a really useful document, actually. Any other questions for Sam? Okay, if not, then we are asked to agree the assurance ratings relating to the delivery of NHS Devon's 24-25 annual plan objectives, and we're asked to agree the proposed amendments to the NHS Devon 24-25 annual plan. Are we happy to agree those recommendations? Okay, if so, we can move on to item 5.4, which is the board assurance framework, and I'll come to you, Philippa, to introduce that item.
Thank you. So the board assurance framework is the framework which sets out the risks to the achievement of our strategic objectives. We have taken an approach where we've aligned it to the NHS oversight framework, and we've also been doing work since the creation of the 24-25 annual plan to ensure that we've aligned the annual plan objectives to the risks, to be really clear that we are mapping delivery of our core corporate objectives. This is an ongoing piece of work, and again, we are feeding into the work that Sam's been talking about in terms of 25-26 planning to make sure that our risk and planning work streams are absolutely aligned, and that we start to address the points that Mark made in terms of making sure that we don't have separate reporting frameworks. We've just got one reporting framework. So I think it's worth flagging that will continue, and obviously we'll start thinking with board members around risk appetite as part of that work as well. We were given an action in a previous board meeting to think about whether or not we needed to add in an additional strategic risk in relation to children and young people, and we went away and we spoke with executive colleagues about this and took the view that actually the risk that is already in the BAF in relation to quality of care, access and outcomes could be strengthened to reflect the fact that it was relating to all ages and not just adults, and that would address the children and young people risk. So I just wanted to flag that to the board, that we've not made that change in terms of adding an additional risk, but we've strengthened the wording of that first risk. We also had an action from the board, and obviously as conversations have continued today in relation to thinking about the financial risk that the system faces, and that was remitted to the Finance and Performance Committee to consider in detail whether or not the risk was appropriately drafted and whether we had the appropriate mitigations in place. I can confirm that that conversation took place at the Finance and Performance Committee and continues at every meeting to be taken forward to think about whether we truly are addressing the risks that we've identified. And I think that then brings me on to a point that Graham has made in his review of the papers, rightly so as Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, to flag that there is not much movement in the ratings of the risk scorings within the BAF and what that might mean. And I think there are two reasons why that might be, and this is the challenge that I put to my executive colleagues every time we consider risk or the BAF. One is, have we got the right mitigations in place? Are they having the impact that we would expect? And the second is the context changing? And I think we can probably take from the conversation today that we've got a little bit of both going on, and it's something that Steve has tasked executives to review all their BAFs in detail before the end of the calendar year to ensure that we have got all those right mitigating actions in place and that we're happy that we've got the right level of impact as a result of those actions. And obviously we continue to review that through the annual plan delivery room process as well. So I think those are the key points that I wanted to pull out in that report, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Philippa. Any questions for Philippa on the BAF? Okay, well, if not, then let's approve the contents for the latest iteration of the 24-25 Board Assurance Framework Risks to Achieving the Strategic Objectives of NHS Devon. And thanks, Philippa. That's great. We now move into section 6 of the agenda, which is partnership working, and we come to Terry. Terry Willows from Cornwall ICB. Over to you to introduce your report, Terry.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously this is Kate's report rather than mine, but and I'll take the report as read, but just a few points that I wanted to draw out. Firstly, like your system, we are working on our ICB response to the 10-year plan consultation, and there is a huge programme of comprehensive kind of engagement with public and patients as we go into the new year to support the public engagement element of the response to that. There is also a huge amount of effort ongoing at the moment, like your system, in terms of thinking about and developing next year's plan. We have, our past few board meetings have focused on agreeing our commissioning intentions for the system, but increasingly our focus over this week and the next couple of weeks is about making sure we're in a position to secure the run rate, exit run rates for our providers coming out of this year, and also then thinking about our substantial kind of efficiency and savings targets that we need to achieve next year and how we're going to go about achieving those whilst transforming the system and creating headroom for the channel shift which we want in terms of moving services out into our communities. The other point that Kate asked me to draw out for you was just about the considerable pressure that we're under as a system. Like your system, obviously, we are very much in the throes of winter. We have a discharge week, a perfect discharge week this week focused on RCHT and trying to shift the dial on our significant number of no criteria to reside patients that we've got in the hospital there. But I wanted to provide assurance to your system that that focus on the perfect week, it does not mean that we're not still focusing on how we can manage discharges out of UHP. So I just wanted to give that assurance. But that's all I wanted to say, and very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Terry. Are there any questions relating to the Cornwall ICB Chief Executive's report? Anthony.
Thank you for raising the no criteria to reside point at the end there. I think we have seen some communication over this week, but I think it would be just useful to understand the plan to reduce the numbers because they are much higher than they've ever been. Appreciate that's not necessarily fair to ask you to respond to it, but just a request so that we can see the detail of that.
Yeah, I'll pass that back to colleagues and absolutely we'll pick that up.
Okay, so if there are no further questions for Terry, let's note the report from Cornwall and Isles of Scilly ICB. We now move on to section 7 of the agenda, which is the committee chair reports. We've already received the Quality of Patient Experience Committee report from Tandy earlier in the meeting. So item 7.2 is 2 reports from the Finance and Performance Committee, the meetings of the 10th of October and the 14th of November. I'll take these reports as read, but I just want to highlight to the board the escalations for information from the 14th of November meeting. First, that we, as a committee, we supported the targeted approach in terms of the interventions at TSD, which we had a long discussion on around the emergent financial risks in the system from there. Judy has already referenced the linking, the request to link resources to the 25-26 annual plan. And then the other issue of escalation there was that we took an overall satisfied assurance from the medium-term financial plan, but we asked for further assurance on the detailed provider plans, which I think is due at the end of December, and that those detailed provider plans should include primary care, the impact on primary care of the medium-term financial plan. Happy to answer any other questions around the Finance and Performance Committee reports. If not, then can we take assurance from the reports and note the escalations for information contained in the report of the meeting held on the 14th of November. Let's move on to the items 7.3 and 7.4. Judy, this is the Primary Care Commissioning Transition Committee. Over to you to introduce your reports, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry you all got this as a late paper, but we only had our meeting last Thursday, so we turned it around as quickly as we could. There is one escalation to the board and then one other item I'd like to read. I realise the escalation to the board is not very clear at all. Board members will be aware that we have been moving towards closing the Primary Care Commissioning and Transition Committee, not just because it has a ridiculously long name, but because what we want to move forward to is a situation where decisions about commissioning primary care are taken alongside all other decisions about commissioning. Of course, sorry, I'm so sorry. Of course, it was a separate committee because I'm just explaining for those who've only just been able to hear me the action that's in the escalation to the board. So the primary care remained a separate committee because it was a delegated commissioning. So I've been doing some very close work with Philippa, who has been working with her executive colleagues on how we can make sure that the work that is currently covered by the Primary Care Commissioning Committee gets covered in other ways. And at our last meeting, we took a very helpful paper on the way in which the executive, as a subcommittee of the executive committee, plan to have a commissioning group that will look at commissioning as a whole. I believe that is still waiting final approval at the beginning of December, but once established, it will be possible for us to take steps to close the Primary Care Committee and make sure that we have gone through all the bits and pieces that need covering. There may still be one or two things that have to come to board specifically, because the reason it was a board committee is some of the delegated commissioning rules make that necessary. I would say that Anthony and his team, as they've transitioned into the new phase 2 or phase 1 and phase 2 structure, have brought together commissioning of primary care and secondary care far more than it was in the past. So that's really been encouraging. So that will be one less report soon to take at this committee. But we do need to make sure that the primary care perspective is fed into decision making all the time. We've been through that a number of times here. The second point I wanted to highlight, it's in the paper, but I just wanted to explain this to people, and it's under committee decisions, and it's the second point there, which is about recommending the closure of the Devon dental waiting list, which might be misunderstood if you thought that it was a classic waiting list, like all the other waiting lists we have, which are constantly verified and checked. Cornwall, and I believe Cornwall are thinking about the same thing. Cornwall and Isles of Scilly and Devon are the only two places in the country where waiting lists were set up for dentistry. Dentistry is very different to the rest of care that we deliver in the NHS, because there is an assumption in the funding pattern that a number of people will buy their own dentistry and pay for their own. And so this notion of everybody coming into the NHS and being on one waiting list is very different for dental. And this waiting list is actually not helping anybody. It's not working effectively to get people to urgent care, and it's creating perhaps a perception that you are in a queue, but actually the way that the service is delivered, being in that queue isn't necessarily helpful, and it's a bit haphazard how you get onto it. So a number of people are seeking dental treatment and are not on this queue. So the committee endorsed a decision that we would stop adding people to this queue as soon as we have very clear explanation of how people access urgent dental care, both for patients and for staff like GPs or minor injuries units. And so that information is very clear for members of the public and professionals. And secondly, we will then address the issues, again, in the same way as Cornwall is having to, about the people who think they are on a waiting list, but are actually, it's not a proper classic waiting list. And I just didn't want there to be any misunderstanding on that. The dental team, a mixture of staff from the regional hub and our own staff are working at full tilt to try and get more services available to the public. I've been really impressed with the pace of work, especially since we put in our own staff to help make a difference on that. And so I don't want people to misunderstand this issue about the waiting list, and that might have caused some confusion. Sorry, that was a bit lengthy, but it was worth it.
Thanks, Judy. Really helpful. I'm just going to ask Philippa to come in on the issues of the new commissioning committee, and your point, Judy, around needing primary care issues to be built into the whole commissioning framework. So, Philippa.
Yes, thank you. So to confirm, as Judy reported, we are due to be taking a paper at the executive meeting next week on the establishment of the commissioning group. We're calling it to distinguish it from a board committee, just to be very clear. And we will be able to, subject to that approval, set that up before the end of the year. We will also be taking a review of the operational scheme of delegation in light of that as well, to make sure that we've got real clarity around the delegated authorities in decision making and commissioning. So that was on that group. On the primary care put into decision making, I can provide assurance to the board that actually in the last day we've had confirmation from our Devon Collaborative Board colleagues of the individuals who'll be joining all of the key system level meetings, the system leadership group and the UEC board and the finance and planning board and so on. So we will be able to ensure that they are within those meetings from next month.
Thanks, Philippa. And Steve, do you want to come in on this as well?
Just 2 points. I guess firstly, to acknowledge on behalf of the board, Judy's leadership of this primary care committee, the tenacity and length of time that you've held it. I think it's been really important. Hopefully, what we're seeing now is the evolution of that and the bringing in of primary care very much into our general thinking, as the point's already been made. I guess it was just one point of clarity, which I think we probably picked up, but having a closure report from the committee with a clear idea about anything that's still in action, where it's going, it might be useful to bring that back to board in January, just so that we've absolutely tied up the loose ends and we know what's outstanding and where it's going.
So before I'm just interested to know how that commissioning group, how this board has oversight of what's happening at the commissioning group. Have you got a mechanism for that?
Thank you. So, yes, the current proposal, subject to agreement at the executive, is that it feeds through to this board via reporting through the chief executive's report, as the NHS Devon executive does. We will provide the terms of reference to the board once approved as well for full assurance. We will include it as part of the review of our corporate governance framework that we intend to undertake before the end of the financial year. So when we get to the March board meeting, we'll be able to provide assurance to the board about the totality of the governance framework. So that should provide additional assurance. And we'll also be taking that through our audit and risk committee beforehand. In terms of the point that Steve raised around the close down report, obviously happy to do that, but also just to confirm that part of the report that we took to the Primary Care Commissioning Transition Committee included information about how we will undertake engagement with our primary care colleagues going forward. So we've already done part of that work. We just need to complete that where the business of the committee goes.
Frank.
I think putting primary care into the Central Commission, it speaks to exactly what we said at the very beginning about having system commissioning and pathway commissioning is exactly the right thing to do. I think it's great that the group will report to the board. My only question would be is how do the non-execs have any input, because it'll just get presented to them.
I might come in on that, and then Philippa might join. I think it's an important point, but we're separating out, I think, the decision-making processes from the assurance processes. So any of the activities of the new commissioning group will be subject to normal assurance processes through committees. If we get the planning right, to link with what Sam said earlier, the board should, in any case, at the beginning of the year, set out what its intentions are, including what that means for commissioning. And then in year, it's a process of assuring ourselves that we're on track with that, if that helps.
I think the only supplementary point that I'd make is that we obviously need to ensure that we get the reporting right through to our board assurance committee. So we would obviously ensure that we enhance our reporting to our finance and performance committee in relation to performance in this space, but also to our quality committee as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for Judy on her committee report? If not, let's note and take assurance from the report from the Primary Care Commissioning Transition Committee. Staying with you then, Judy, for 7.4, the People and Organisational Development Committee from the 7th of November.
Okay. I had also not in gear about using this. So this was the first meeting of the new People and Organisational Development Committee, and it was very much a set-up meeting. We reviewed the terms of reference, we reviewed the membership, and that led to a change that was then reflected in the Chair's report earlier on. And we began to set the approach we're going to take on different issues. The EDI approach that the team have taken up for dealing with NHS Devon's responsibilities around EDI was discussed in detail, and we want to keep a close review on that because it is a different way of working to the way we worked before, but we were hopeful that this could work well. So I don't think there's anything more to pick up.
Thanks, Julie. Any questions relating to the report from the People and Organisational Development Committee? So if not, let's take assurance from the report, and we're also asked to support the recommendation from the committee regarding the importance of addressing EDI more often at this board meeting, which we're happy to do. Okay, we're coming to the closing items. As I mentioned at the start of the meeting, on questions from members of the public, we have got a series of questions from Councillor Goffey, and we have undertaken to respond in writing to those, and then to put the responses to those on our website. Are there any other questions from members of the public in the meeting today, or any others that we've been notified of, Philippa?
We've not been notified of any others.
Okay, if not, then we can move on to any other business. Is there any other business from board members? Martin?
Not strictly any other business, but just reflecting on the agenda and something I probably should have asked earlier in terms of the BAF, perhaps. In paper 5.2, the Incentive and Assertive Outreach Community Mental Health, I think we sort of accepted as a board a level of risk, around things not being quite in place at the moment, and I wasn't sure whether that was a sufficient risk to be reflected in the BAF now or not, whether it is at a lower level in the BAF or whether it should be put in the BAF, so perhaps just something we might consider.
That's a good point, Martin. Philippa?
Happy to take an action to review that alongside Peter and Mental Health Collaborative colleagues to determine level of risk and the mitigations and bring a recommendation back to the next board meeting.
Thanks, Philippa. Any other business from any other members of the board? If not, then we can bring the meeting to a close. But just to say, the next board meeting in public will be the 30th of January 2025. Thank you for the quality of the papers today. Thank you for all of the contributions at the board. And we'll now close the meeting and end the live stream. Joss, thanks very much.